Main body, the alarm went off at 6:47 a.m. Sophia Reed opened her eyes to a ceiling she hadn't seen in 8 years, popcorn texture, water stain in the corner, the cheap light fixture her mother had complained about every time she walked into this room. She sat up, her body moved wrong, lighter, younger, without the ache in her lower back that had settled in during year 3 of her marriage. Her hands, when she looked at them, were 22-year-old hands. No wedding band, she remembered dying. She remembered the hospital room, white walls, beeping machines, the particular loneliness of a deathbed no one had come to visit. Adrian had sent flowers. She'd told the nurse to take them away. She hadn't wanted his guilt gifts. She'd wanted the life she'd never lived, Harvard, a career. The version of herself who didn't wake up every morning in a marriage she'd been traded into like a stock option. Then the machines had gone flat. Then darkness, and now this. Her phone confirmed it. The date was 8 years in the past. The day the Chase family's lawyer was scheduled to arrive at the Reed household to formalize the marriage arrangement. In her previous life, Sophia had sat in the living room that afternoon and nodded silently while her parents explained that she, not Vanessa, would marry Adrian Chase, the disabled CEO of Chase Industries. It was for the family, for the business. The Reed textile supply chain was dying, and the Chase alliance was the only thing that could save it. Her mother had framed it as an honor. Her father had just looked at the floor. Sophia had believed them. She had spent 4 years of marriage believing it was her duty, her burden, her cross to bear, and she had been miserable, not because Adrian was cruel. He wasn't. He was distant, quiet, and occasionally unexpectedly kind in ways she had refused to recognize, but because she had believed down to her bones that she was the second choice, that Vanessa was too beautiful, too precious to waste on a man in a wheelchair, that Sophia was the acceptable sacrifice. The memory of that belief sat in her chest now like a stone she'd been carrying for 2 lifetimes. She got out of bed. The floorboards creaked in the exact pattern she remembered downstairs. She could hear her mother's voice, clipped, efficient, giving instructions to the housekeeper about the important meeting this afternoon. Sophia stood in front of her closet. Her clothes from 8 years ago, sensible sweaters, practical trousers, nothing that called attention, the wardrobe of a woman who had been told she was the smart one, not the pretty one, and had dressed accordingly. Not today. She pulled on jeans and a Harvard hoodie, the one she'd bought the day she'd been accepted 4 years ago, before her parents had convinced her to defer for a year. That year had turned into an engagement, then a marriage, then a lifetime of deferred dreams. She zipped the hoodie up to her chin. The crimson H over her heart felt like armor. At 2:00 p.m., the doorbell rang. Sophia walked downstairs. Her mother, Margaret Reed, was already in the living room, arranging herself on the sofa like a queen receiving tribute. Vanessa, golden-haired, delicate, wearing a pale pink dress that made her look like a porcelain doll, perched on the armchair by the window. Their father, Harold Reed, stood by the mantelpiece with a glass of whiskey he'd been nursing since noon. The lawyer was a thin man in a gray suit. He carried a leather briefcase that looked older than Sophia. His name was Arthur Webb, and Sophia remembered him from her previous life, remembered the way he'd barely looked at her as he laid out the terms of her future. Mr. and Mrs. Reed, Webb began, settling into the armchair across from Margaret. As we discussed, the Chase family is prepared to move forward with the alliance. The terms are generous. In exchange for the marriage, Chase Industries will guarantee a 10-year supply contract with Reed Textiles at preferential rates plus a capital infusion of. We understand the terms, Margaret said. Let's discuss the details. Vanessa examined her nails. She hadn't looked at Sophia once. Sophia stood in the doorway. She hadn't sat down. Webb opened his briefcase. The wedding would be in the spring. Mr. Chase is amenable to a ceremony here in Connecticut, at the Reed estate if you prefer, though the Chase family would be happy to host it there. I'm not marrying him. The words left Sophia's mouth before she'd fully decided to speak them. The room went still. Margaret's head turned slowly like a predator catching a new scent. Excuse me. I'm not marrying Adrian Chase. Sophia stepped into the room. Her voice was calm, which surprised her. In her previous life, she had never once spoken to her mother this way. Let Vanessa marry him. Vanessa's head snapped up. What? Sophia. Margaret's voice was ice. We discussed this, the arrangement. The arrangement was for a Reed daughter. Sophia looked at her mother. There are 2 of us. Let it be Vanessa. You can't be serious, Vanessa said. Her voice had gone up half an octave, the beginning of the meltdown Sophia had seen 100 times. He's in a wheelchair. He can't even. He's a billionaire, Sophia said. He runs a Fortune 500 company. He's smart, he's strategic, and from everything I've read, he's a better person than most of the men in this room. She paused. But if you don't want him, Vanessa, by all means, I'll marry him. I just thought you might prefer the Chase fortune to whatever middle manager mother was going to find for you next. The silence that followed was sharper than the shouting would have been. Margaret's eyes were fixed on Sophia like she was seeing her for the first time. Where is this coming from? Harvard, Sophia wanted to say. 8 years of regret. A hospital room where I died alone, but she said none of it. I've deferred my admission for a year, she said. I'm not deferring it for a lifetime. I'm going to Harvard. You can't. Margaret stood. The family needs. The family needs a signed contract with Chase Industries. Vanessa can provide that. She's beautiful, she's charming, she's exactly what a business alliance needs for public appearances. I'm the one who stays up until 2 a.m. reading economic forecasts. I'm the one who's going to Harvard. Vanessa was staring at her now. Something flickered in her eyes. Calculation, not hurt. Sophia had never noticed before how quickly her sister's mind worked when there was something to gain. Mother, Vanessa said slowly, if Sophia doesn't want the arrangement, I could do it for the family. Margaret looked between her daughters. For a long moment no one spoke. Sophia's father set down his whiskey glass. Let her go, he said quietly. It was the first thing he'd said since she'd walked in. Margaret shot him a look. He didn't flinch. A small thing, but Sophia noticed it. She'd never seen him not flinch before. I'll need to confirm with the Chase family, Webb said, his professional composure barely cracking. The arrangement specified. Well, I'll need to confirm. Confirm quickly, Sophia said. I have a train to catch. She turned and walked out of the living room. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was not. Upstairs she packed. Her room held almost nothing she wanted. A few books, her laptop, the Harvard acceptance letter she'd kept in her desk drawer for 4 years. She unfolded it now and read it for the first time in this life. Dear read it is our great pleasure to offer you admission to Harvard University. In her previous life, she had thrown this letter away. Her mother had told her it was time to be realistic. Sophia had cried for 3 days, then put on a smile and walked down an aisle toward a man she'd never met. This time, she folded the letter carefully and placed it in her bag. She was zipping her suitcase when she heard a sound behind her. Vanessa stood in the doorway. That was quite a performance, Vanessa said. It wasn't a performance. Vanessa leaned against the doorframe. The afternoon light caught her hair, turning it gold. She looked like an angel. She always did. Why are you really doing this? Vanessa asked. Sophia considered telling the truth. Because in my previous life, I married him and I was miserable. Because I died alone in a hospital bed regretting everything I never did. Because I spent 4 years as his wife and I never once let myself see him as a person. I only saw him as the cage I was put in. She said. Because I want to go to Harvard. Vanessa studied her for a moment, then she smiled, the particular smile she used when she decided to take something she wanted. Fine, I'll marry your crippled CEO, but don't come crying to me when Harvard turns out to be harder than you think. When? Sophia said, zipping the suitcase closed. Has anything ever been harder than I think? Vanessa's smile flickered. For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped and Sophia saw something underneath, something that looked almost like fear. Then it was gone. Good luck, little sister, Vanessa said and walked away. Sophia stood alone in her childhood bedroom. Through the window, she could see the driveway where Webb's car was pulling away, presumably to call the Chase family with the new arrangement. In her previous life, she had stood at this same window the night before her wedding and cried until her throat was raw. She didn't cry now. She thought about Adrian Chase. The fragments of memory from her previous life surfaced unbidden. The way he'd wheeled himself to the window every morning and watched the sunrise in silence. The way he'd asked, once in the 3rd year of their marriage, Sophia, do you ever think this could be different? And the way she'd walked out of the room without answering. The way he'd sent flowers to her hospital bed even after she'd signed the divorce papers. She had never asked him what he wanted. She had never asked him anything. The girl she had been, the one who accepted her fate, who believed she was the spare, who resented a marriage she never tried to understand. That girl had died in a hospital bed 8 years from now. The woman standing in this bedroom was someone else. She picked up her suitcase and walked downstairs. Her mother was in the kitchen on the phone with someone. The florist, from what Sophia could hear, already discussing wedding arrangements. Margaret looked up as Sophia passed and covered the receiver with her hand. You'll regret this. Maybe, Sophia said. But it will be my regret, not yours. She walked out the front door. Her father's car was in the driveway. The keys were in the ignition. Harold always left them there. a habit Margaret had nagged him about for 20 years. Sophia got in, turned the key, and pulled out of the driveway of the only home she'd ever known. The train station was 40 minutes away. She drove with the windows down. Even though it was cold, the sharp New England air felt like waking up. Behind her, the Reed estate grew smaller in the rearview mirror. Ahead of her was Boston, Harvard, a life that belonged to no one but her. At the station, she bought a one-way ticket. The man at the counter didn't look at her twice. She was just another girl with a suitcase and somewhere to be. On the platform waiting for the train, she pulled out her phone and typed a name into the search bar. Adrian Chase. The results loaded, dozens of articles. CEO, philanthropist, survivor. There was a photo, a press shot from a charity gala. He was in his wheelchair, dark suit, sharp eyes. He was looking at the camera with an expression she'd seen 100 times in her previous life and never once understood. It wasn't coldness, it was waiting. She closed the browser. Not today. Today belonged to her. The train pulled into the station. She picked up her suitcase and stepped aboard. 8 years of someone else's life, wiped clean. Ahead of her, Harvard. Yard, lecture halls, late nights in the library. A future she would build with her own hands. Behind her, a sister she'd never trusted. A mother who'd never loved her. And a man in a wheelchair whose silence she'd mistaken for indifference. She didn't look back, not once, but she would think about that photo. And those eyes, more times than she'd admit to anyone, including herself. Title: The Girl Who Left. Previous chapter recap. After waking up reborn with 8 years of memories from a miserable arranged marriage, Sophia Reed defied her family and refused to marry Adrian Chase, the disabled CEO. Instead, she declared she was going to Harvard and let her beautiful older sister Vanessa take the marriage arrangement. She walked out of the Reed family home with a suitcase and a one-way train ticket. Main body. The call came 3 hours after she arrived in Cambridge. Sophia was standing in the middle of an empty dorm room. White walls, twin bed, a desk that had seen better decades. When her phone buzzed with her mother's name on the screen, she let it ring twice, 3 times, then she answered. "Your father and I have discussed it," Margaret Reed said without preamble. The word discuss was generous, and Sophia knew it. If you're determined to throw away your family obligations, you'll do it on your own dime. Your tuition, your housing, your meals. Don't call us when you run out of money. Sophia looked around the room. The window faced a brick wall. The radiator clanked in a rhythm that suggested it might not survive the winter. It was the most beautiful room she had ever stood in. "I understand," she said. "That's it, I understand. What would you like me to say, Mother?" A pause, then. "I would like you to come home. This is your last chance, Sophia. The Chase family hasn't signed yet. You can still." "Goodbye, Mother." She hung up before Margaret could respond. For a long moment, she simply stood in the empty room, phone gripped in her hand. She had done it. She had actually done it. Cut the rope, burned the bridge, walked away from the only life she'd ever known. The girl she had been in her previous life would have crumbled at the first sign of her mother's disapproval. That girl had spent 22 years twisting herself into shapes that might finally earn Margaret's approval. That girl was dead. The silence that followed was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She had no money, no support, no safety net. The small savings account she'd built from summer jobs in her previous life didn't exist in this one, because in this life she'd never worked those jobs. She had deferred her admission and spent the year at home, being prepared for a marriage that would never happen. She sat down on the bare mattress and opened her laptop. Financial aid office, work-study programs, on-campus jobs. She filled out forms until her eyes blurred. The next morning, she walked into the financial aid office and didn't leave until she had a work-study placement, a payment plan, and the name of every scholarship she might qualify for. The woman behind the desk, a tired-looking administrator named Mrs. Kowalski, watched her with something between pity and admiration. "Young lady," Mrs. Kowalski said, "I've been doing this job for 22 years. I know a student who's running from something when I see one." "I'm not running," Sophia said. "I'm running toward." Mrs. Kowalski stamped a form and slid it across the counter. "Good answer. Dining hall, Tuesday through Friday, 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. breakfast shift. Don't be late." Sophia wasn't late. She was never late. The first weeks at Harvard were a blur of fluorescent-lit lecture halls, library stacks that smelled like old paper and ambition, and the particular exhaustion of a body running on 5 hours of sleep and cafeteria coffee. Her classmates were 18-year-old prodigies and 20-year-old legacy admissions. They talked about high school and summer internships and their parents' houses in Nantucket. Sophia was 22, older than most of them, quieter than all of them. She sat in the front row of every class, took notes until her hand cramped, and didn't speak unless she had something to say. Her professors noticed her anyway, not because she was loud, but because when she did speak, her answers were too precise, too strategic, as though she'd already seen the business case studies unfold, she couldn't explain that she had. In another life, 3 weeks into the semester, a news alert appeared. On her phone, Chase Industries heir Adrian Chase to marry Vanessa Reed. Spring wedding planned at Chase Estate *. Sophia stared at the headline for longer than she meant to. There was a photo of Vanessa, radiant in a white dress at some engagement party Sophia hadn't been invited to, and beside her in a dark suit in his wheelchair Adrian Chase. He looked exactly as she remembered, the same sharp cheekbones, the same winter-gray eyes, the same expression she'd spent 4 years misreading as coldness. She zoomed in on the photo without meaning to. It was a press shot, perfectly composed. Vanessa was smiling the way she always smiled for cameras, wide, practiced, showing just enough teeth. Adrian wasn't smiling at all. He was looking slightly to the left of the lens, as though something outside the frame had caught his attention or someone. Sophia thought and closed the app before she could finish the thought. That night, she couldn't sleep. The radiator in her dorm room had chosen that particular evening to work overtime, filling the small space with a clanking rhythm that made concentration impossible. She gave up on her economics reading at 2 a.m. and lay staring at the ceiling instead. The memory came without warning. Not the way memories usually did, but the way they did when she'd been reborn, vivid, physical, as though she was living it again. She was in the library of the Chase estate. Year 2 of her marriage. It was late, past midnight, and she'd come downstairs. Because sleep was impossible in a bed that felt like a stranger's, she'd expected the library to be empty. Adrian was there. He was in his wheelchair, positioned by the tall window that overlooked the estate's east garden. A book was open in his lap, but he wasn't reading it. He was looking out at the darkness, his profile sharp against the moonlight. She had frozen in the doorway. In 483 days of marriage, she had never seen him like this, unguarded, still, almost peaceful. He looked like a man who had made peace with being alone, and there was something about that expression that had made her chest ache. He had turned his head then, just slightly. He'd seen her, she was sure of it. His eyes had met hers in the dark, but he hadn't spoken, hadn't called her name. He just looked at her, and the silence between them had been a question neither of them knew how to ask. She had walked away. She had gone back upstairs, back to her separate bedroom, and she had told herself it didn't matter. But in this life, lying in her Harvard dorm room with the radiator clanking and the Cambridge wind rattling the window, Sophia finally let herself wonder, what question had he been asking, and why had she been so afraid of the answer? She rolled over and pulled the blanket up to her chin. The engagement was done, the arrangement was made. Adrian Chase belonged to her sister's future now, or her sister belonged to his. Either way, it had nothing to do with her. She repeated that to herself until the radiator's rhythm faded into something like a heartbeat. Then she fell asleep. October passed in a haze of midterms and meal shifts. Sophia's work-study job at the dining hall was unglamorous. She arrived at 5:45 am, tied on an apron, and served scrambled eggs to sleepy undergraduates who never looked at her face. The job paid minimum wage and left her smelling like bacon grease, but it covered her meal plan, and that was enough. Her classes were harder than she'd expected, not the content which she absorbed with a hunger that surprised even her, but the social landscape. Harvard was a network as much as an institution, and Sophia had no network. The other business students had family connections, mentors, alumni, parents who opened doors. Sophia had a dining hall apron and a stack of library books. She didn't mind, or rather, she told herself she didn't mind. The work was what mattered, the knowledge was what mattered, everything else was noise. But some nights, the noise crept in anyway. She'd be walking back from the library at 11 p.m., the campus emptying out around her, and she'd see a group of students laughing together outside a dining hall. She'd hear someone call a friend's name across the quad, small things, ordinary things, and she'd feel it. A loneliness that didn't come from being alone, but from knowing that no one in this city, in this state, in this entire new life she'd built, would notice if she disappeared. She pushed through it the same way she'd pushed through every other hard thing in 2 lifetimes. By working harder, by staying busier, by telling herself that loneliness was the price of freedom, and freedom was worth any price. By November she had a reputation, the serious one, the one who sat in the front row, the one whose cold calls in business strategy class made the professor pause and say, "That's actually an interesting point." She didn't make friends, she didn't join study groups, she went to class, she went to the library, she went to the dining hall, and at night she lay in her dorm room and stared at the ceiling and tried not to think about what her sister's life looked like right now. The engagement announcement was the last she'd heard. Her mother hadn't called again. Her father hadn't either. She didn't know if Vanessa was happy or miserable or somewhere in between. and she told herself she didn't care. But sometimes, late at night, she pulled up the photo from the engagement announcement and looked at Adrian's face, the way he wasn't looking at the camera, the way he wasn't looking at Vanessa either, and she remembered the library, the moonlight, the question in his eyes that she'd spent 2 lifetimes refusing to answer. One night in early December, she opened her laptop and typed Adrian Chase Philanthropy into the search bar. The results filled 3 pages: children's hospitals, accessibility advocacy, anonymous donations to research on spinal cord injuries, a foundation he'd started in his father's name that provided college scholarships to first-generation students. She read every article. She couldn't stop. She was chasing something. Not him, she told herself, but the version of him she'd never bothered to know in her previous life. She had been his wife for 4 years and had never once asked what he cared about. She had treated him like a sentence she was serving. And now, in this life, separated by distance and an engagement ring on her sister's finger, she was finally letting herself see him. The articles painted a picture of a man who had survived the unsurvivable. The car accident that put him in the wheelchair had been suspicious. A hit and run on a rural highway, no witnesses, no suspects. He'd been 28. He'd spent 6 months in the hospital and another year in physical therapy. During that time, his company's stock had dropped 40%. Everyone had written him off, and then he'd rebuilt from his hospital bed, from his wheelchair. He'd restructured the company, ousted the board members who'd tried to push him out, and within 2 years Chase Industries was worth more than it had been before the accident. He'd done it all without raising his voice, without public drama, without any of the theatrics the business press loved. Sophia closed the laptop at 2:47 a.m. and sat in the dark. Her chest felt strange, tight, hot, like something was pushing against her ribs from the inside. She didn't want to name it. She was afraid that if she did, everything she'd told herself about her new life would collapse. She went to work the next morning at 5:45 a.m. She tied on her apron. She served scrambled eggs to a freshman who asked for extra bacon and didn't say thank you. She went to class and sat in the front row and took notes until her wrist ached. She didn't look at her phone once, but all day the question followed her. What question had he been asking? She didn't have an answer. She wasn't sure she wanted one. The girl who had walked out of the Reed house 3 months ago had been so certain that Harvard was the answer, that leaving was freedom, that the marriage she'd escaped had been a cage and nothing more. But that girl hadn't known about the children's hospital donations. That girl hadn't read about the Spinal Cord Research Foundation. That girl hadn't understood that the man she'd been married to for 4 years had been quietly, relentlessly building a better world while she'd been too busy resenting him to notice. That girl had believed, with the absolute certainty of the young and the wounded, that she knew everything she needed to know about Adrian Chase. She had been wrong, and now she had to live with the question she couldn't stop asking: what else was I wrong about? For the first time since she'd woken up in her childhood bedroom with 8 years of memories burning behind her eyes, Sophia Reed let herself wonder if leaving had been the right choice, or just the right choice for the wrong reasons. Title: The Weight of Memory. Previous chapter recap. Cut off by her family, Sophia began her new life at Harvard, working the breakfast shift at the dining hall, excelling in her classes, and deliberately distancing herself from news of her sister Vanessa's engagement to Adrian Chase. But late one night, unable to sleep, she found herself researching Adrian's philanthropic work, and realized she had never truly known the man she'd been married to in her previous life. Main body. 3 months into her first semester, Sophia Reed stopped feeling like an imposter. It happened gradually, a comment in her macroeconomics seminar that made the professor pause mid-lecture, a paper on market disruption strategies that earned a handwritten note in red ink: see me after class. This is graduate-level thinking. A study group invitation from a girl named Priya who sat 2 rows behind her and had noticed. She said that Sophia actually reads the footnotes. By November, Sophia had a routine 5:45 a.m. dining hall shift, 8:00 a.m. first class afternoons, library corral on the 3rd floor, the one by the window that overlooked the law school lawn. Evenings, more reading, more notes, the slow accumulation of knowledge that felt like building something solid in a life that had been nothing but shifting ground. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. What surprised her was how much she liked it, the intellectual hunger, the sense of forward motion. In her previous life, she had spent 4 years managing a household she resented, filling her days with tasks that meant nothing. Here, every hour moved her closer to something. Every page of every textbook was a brick in a wall she was building around herself. She was building a fortress, and she hadn't realized it yet. The invitation came in early December, slipped under her dorm room door in a cream-colored envelope embossed with the Harvard Business School crest. The Aldrich Case competition. an annual event that paired undergraduate economics, students with MBA mentors to solve real-world business challenges. Winners received a summer internship at the consulting firm of their choice and a recommendation letter from the dean of the business school. Sophia read the invitation 3 times. She had heard of the Aldrich competition everyone had. Last year's winner was now at McKinsey, the year before that, Bain. This was the kind of opportunity that didn't come to work-study students who smelled like bacon grease. She applied anyway. The preliminary round was a written analysis of a fictional company in decline. Sophia spent 3 days in the library, living on vending machine crackers and coffee, building a turnaround strategy that drew on economic principles she'd absorbed from 2 lifetimes of paying attention. She submitted her analysis at 11:53 p.m., 7 minutes before the deadline. The results came a week later. She had advanced. "Of course you did," Priya said when Sophia told her. They were sitting in the dining hall. Priya's meal, Sophia's 15-minute break between shifts. "You're the only person I know who gets excited about reading SEC filings." "I don't get excited," Sophia said. "I get prepared." That's exactly what someone who gets excited would say. Sophia almost smiled. It was a small thing. A near smile, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes. But it was more than she'd allowed herself in months. 2 weeks later, the team assignments came through. Sophia's group consisted of 2 MBA students, Derek Aldridge, a former investment banker who spoke in bullet points, and Mei Lin, a soft-spoken woman from Singapore whose strategic instincts were as sharp as anyone Sophia had ever met, plus Professor Harris as faculty advisor. Their first meeting was in a glass-walled conference room at the business school. Harris laid out the competition structure: 3 rounds, preliminary written analysis, semi-final presentation to a panel of industry judges, final round in front of the dean and a live audience of recruiters from every major consulting firm on the East Coast. "Every year," Harris said, "at least one team crashes out because they treat the case like a textbook problem. Don't do that. Real companies have real people, real politics, real histories. If you can't factor in the human element, you'll lose to someone who can." Sophia wrote that down. Human element. She had spent 2 lifetimes learning that lesson. Over the next 3 weeks, the team met 4 times a week. Sophia arrived early every time, earlier than the MBAs who had packed schedules and overbooked calendars. She read the previous year's winning cases. She built financial models in Excel until the columns blurred. She prepared for every possible industry the final case might cover. Mei Lin noticed. "You work like someone's chasing you," she said one evening, after Derek had left early for a networking event. Sophia didn't look up from her laptop. "Maybe someone is." Mei didn't ask who, she just nodded, the way people do when they recognize a fellow refugee from something they don't talk about. The second round required teams. Sophia was assigned to a group with 2 MBA students and a faculty advisor. Professor David Harris, a silver-haired economist who had testified before Congress 3 times and seemed permanently unimpressed by everything. "Your preliminary analysis was solid," Harris said at their first meeting. "But the final case won't be fictional. It'll be a real company, real problems, real stakes. You'll need more than textbook answers." "What kind of company?" Sophia asked. Harris shrugged. "They don't tell us until the day before. Could be anything: tech startup, manufacturing, financial services. They pick companies that are actually in trouble, the kind of problems that keep CEOs up at night." Sophia nodded. She didn't say what she was thinking, that she had watched a CEO keep himself up at night, that she had lived in the same house as a man who ran a billion-dollar company from a wheelchair, and she had never once asked him what he was worried about. That night, she was in the library with her team, running scenario analyses on a whiteboard, when one of the MBA students, a man named Derek with an MBA's confidence and an undergraduate's attention span, mentioned a name that made Sophia's hand freeze mid-equation. "The turnaround at Chase Industries would make a great case study," Derek said, scrolling through his phone instead of contributing to the whiteboard. "Did you guys see their quarterly numbers? They just closed a $2 billion deal from a wheelchair. The guy's a machine." Priya, who had joined the study session as moral support, looked up. "The CEO, the one who got in that car accident?" "Yeah, Adrian Chase. He basically rebuilt the company from his hospital bed. The stock tanked after the accident. Everyone thought he was done, but he restructured everything, cut the dead weight, replaced half the board. Now they're worth more than before." Derek shook his head. "Honestly, if I had half his strategic instinct, I wouldn't be in business school." Sophia's marker was still pressed against the whiteboard. She hadn't written anything in 30 seconds. "The accident," she said. Her voice came out flatter than she intended. "What do you know about it?" Derek shrugged. "Hit and run, no witnesses, rural highway in Connecticut. The police report said it was probably an animal, a deer or something, that swerved him off the road, but there were rumors." He leaned forward, enjoying the attention. Some people think it wasn't an accident. Business rivals, the kind of people who don't like it when a 28-year-old CEO starts disrupting their industry. What kind of rumors? Sophia asked. I don't know, conspiracy stuff. The investigation was never really closed. Derek waved a hand, already bored with the topic. Anyway, the guy survived, so it worked out. Chase Industries is killing it. Asterisk, the guy survived. Asterisk, as if that were the end of the story, as if surviving a murder attempt, if that's what it was just a footnote in a quarterly earnings report. Sophia turned back to the whiteboard. She finished the equation. She didn't look at her phone, but later, alone in her dorm room, she opened her laptop and typed the word she'd been avoiding for weeks: Adrian Chase accident investigation. The search results were sparse: news articles from 4 years ago, police reports with redacted sections, a single investigative piece from a Connecticut newspaper that raised questions about tire tread marks and a vehicle that had never been identified. The reporter had interviewed a former Chase Industries employee who claimed that Adrian had been warned. Something was coming, the employee said, and then the employee had been fired for unrelated reasons. Sophia read until her eyes burned. The radiator clanked its familiar rhythm. Outside her window, Cambridge was quiet and cold. She thought about the library, the moonlight, his face in the dark. In her previous life, she remembered, there had been one night, year 3 of the marriage, when Adrian had tried to talk to her, really talk. She had been in the living room, arranging flowers in a vase she'd bought to make the Chase estate feel less like a prison. The flowers were gardenias, white petals, her favorite. She hadn't known they were her favorite yet. She'd figured it out that year, the way prisoners figure out what they miss about the outside world. Adrian had wheeled into the room. He'd stopped a few feet from her, and for a long moment, he just watched her arrange the flowers. Sophia, he'd said. She hadn't turned around. What? Do you ever think this could be different? She had paused. Her hands had stilled on the stems. She had known in that moment that he was asking something important, something that had nothing to do with flower arrangements or household budgets or any of the mundane subjects they usually discussed, and she had said, I don't know what you mean. She had known exactly what he meant. She had walked out of the room. She had gone upstairs to her separate bedroom. She had lain awake for hours, replaying the question, and then she had buried it so deep she'd almost forgotten it existed. Almost now in her Harvard dorm room, 3 months into a life she'd chosen for herself, Sophia closed her laptop and pressed her palms against her eyes. The question wasn't what did he mean. The question was, why was I so afraid of the answer? Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall. The flakes were small and tentative, the kind that melt as soon as they hit the ground. Sophia watched them through the window. In Connecticut, her sister was planning a wedding, somewhere in the Chase estate. A man in a wheelchair was running a billion-dollar company and wondering, perhaps, why the woman who was supposed to marry him had disappeared without a word. She didn't know why she was thinking about him. She didn't know why she couldn't stop. She opened her laptop again. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She typed Adrian Chase. Then she closed the browser. Asterisk, not today. Asterisk, she told herself, not ever. This is your life now. This is what you chose. She went to bed. She didn't sleep. The next morning, she arrived at the dining hall at 5:42 am, 3 minutes early. She tied on her apron and stood at her station as the first students trickled in, bleary-eyed and silent. The scrambled eggs were the same as always. The coffee was the same. The rhythm of the ladle and the plate and the next student and the next was the same. But something had shifted. She could feel it. A hairline crack in the fortress she'd been building. It wasn't visible yet. It didn't affect her work or her grades or her carefully constructed routine. But it was there. The knowledge that Adrian Chase was not the man she'd believed him to be. That her previous life had been consumed by a resentment built on a foundation of ignorance. She had been angry at him for years. But what exactly had he done wrong? He had been distant, but so had she. He had been cold, but she had never given him a reason to be warm. He had failed to fight for their marriage, but neither had she. She had treated him like her jailer. But looking back now, with the clarity that came from distance and research and the slow, painful process of honesty, she could see what she'd refused to see for 4 years. Adrian Chase had been as trapped as she was. He had been navigating an arranged marriage he hadn't chosen, with a wife who resented him before she'd ever spoken a word to him, and through all of it, he had been quietly building, surviving, giving. She didn't know what to do with this knowledge. She couldn't unknow it. She couldn't go back to the simple story she'd told herself. The story where she was the victim, the martyr, the woman who'd sacrificed everything for a family that didn't deserve her. The truth was more complicated. The truth almost always was that week, she advanced to the semi-final round of the Aldrich competition, her team celebrated. Derek bought a round of drinks at a bar near Harvard Square. And even Professor Harris cracked something that might have been a smile. Sophia drank a single glass of wine and excused herself early. She walked back to her dorm through the first real snowfall of the season. The campus was transformed. The brick buildings dusted white, the paths silent, the whole world muffled and clean. She stopped in the middle of Harvard Yard and tilted her face up toward the sky. The snow landed on her cheeks and melted immediately. She thought about the gardenias she'd arranged in her previous life. White petals, fragile, beautiful for no reason other than that they existed. She thought about Adrian's question, "Do you ever think this could be different?" She had never given him an answer in this life. She told herself she would not make the same mistake, not with Harvard, not with the competition, not with anything that mattered. But she still didn't know if Adrian Chase was one of the things that mattered, and that uncertainty more than anything else was what kept her awake at night. Title: Echoes from Home. Previous chapter recap. Flourishing at Harvard, Sophia advanced to the semifinals of the prestigious Aldrich Case competition. But her research into Adrian Chase's accident and her memories of the one time he tried to reach her, asking, "Do you ever think this could be different?" left her questioning everything she believed about her previous life. Main body, she hadn't planned to go home for Christmas. The decision was logistical, not emotional. Or so she told herself. The dorms closed on December 22nd. Her dining hall shifts were suspended until January. She had nowhere else to go and no money for a hotel. So on the morning of December 23rd, she boarded a Greyhound bus in Boston and watched the city shrink in the window as the highway unspooled toward Connecticut. The Reed estate looked exactly as she'd left it. Imposing, cold, the kind of house that was designed to impress people who would never be invited inside. The Christmas decorations were tasteful, white lights, real wreaths, nothing excessive. Margaret Reed didn't do excessive, she did correct. Sophia's mother opened the door herself. This was unusual. Normally the housekeeper handled arrivals, but Margaret was standing in the foyer when Sophia walked in, wrapped in cashmere in disapproval. "You're thinner," Margaret said. It wasn't a compliment. "I'm fine. The dining hall job, I heard about it." "Really, Sophia? Serving breakfast to undergraduates? Do you have any idea how that reflects on this family?" Sophia set down her bag. "I didn't realize the family was still keeping track. Vanessa mentioned it. She has friends at Harvard." Of course she did. Vanessa had friends everywhere. The kind of friends who existed to report back to her, to confirm that she was winning whatever invisible competition she'd been running since childhood. "Where is Vanessa?" Sophia asked. "Upstairs resting." Margaret's jaw tightened. "The wedding preparations have been exhausting. The Chase family has expectations." Sophia didn't ask what kind of expectations. She carried her bag up to her childhood bedroom, which had been preserved exactly as she'd left it, down to the water stain on the ceiling and the Harvard hoodie she'd forgotten to pack. Someone had made the bed, the housekeeper probably. She didn't see Vanessa until Christmas Eve dinner. The dining room table was set for four: Sophia, her parents, and Vanessa. The fifth chair, the one that had been empty since Sophia's grandfather died, had been removed entirely. The food was perfect: roast beef, glazed carrots, the kind of meal that took a kitchen staff 6 hours to prepare and a family 20 minutes to eat in near silence. Vanessa arrived 10 minutes late, and when she walked into the dining room, Sophia nearly dropped her fork. Her sister looked wrecked. Not in any obvious way. Vanessa was too skilled for that. Her hair was still golden, her makeup was still flawless, her dress was still expensive, but she was too thin, not fashionably thin, but the kind of thin that came from not eating or not sleeping or both. There were shadows under her eyes that concealer couldn't quite hide. Her smile, when she produced it, was the same practiced smile from the engagement photos. And now Sophia could see how much effort it cost. "Sophia," Vanessa said, sliding into her chair. "How's Harvard?" "It's good." "That's nice." Vanessa didn't ask for details. She never had. The dinner proceeded in the stiff, choreographed way that Reed family dinners always had. Harold asked about Sophia's classes. Margaret redirected the conversation to the wedding. Vanessa pushed food around her plate without eating any of it. The roast beef grew cold. No one mentioned the empty chair or the years of resentment that filled the room more completely than any guest ever could. After dinner, Sophia found herself alone in the kitchen, rinsing her plate in the sink. The housekeeper had been given the night off. Margaret's idea of holiday generosity. "You're doing dishes now." Vanessa's voice came from the doorway. She was holding a glass of wine that looked untouched. "Habit," Sophia said. "Dining hall job." "Right, the dining hall job." Vanessa took a step into the kitchen. She closed the door behind her. The click of the latch was soft but final. You know what people are saying about you. That you ran away, that you couldn't handle the arrangement, that you were too scared to marry a man in a wheelchair. Sophia dried her hands on a towel. Is that what they're saying? That's what I'm saying, it's easier than the truth. And what's the truth? Vanessa's smile faltered for just a moment. A fraction of a second, Sophia saw something underneath the perfect veneer, something raw. The truth, Vanessa said quietly, is that you were smarter than me, you got out. The kitchen was very quiet. Through the window, Sophia could see snow falling on the back garden. The same garden where she played as a child, where Vanessa had once pushed her off the swing set and then cried so convincingly that Sophia had been the one punished. What's happening, Vanessa? Vanessa took a sip of wine. Her hand was trembling, so slightly that Sophia might not have noticed if she hadn't been looking for it. Nothing, everything's fine. The wedding is in April. It's going to be beautiful. The Chase estate has a ballroom that seats 300. Mother is in heaven. She paused. Adrian is Adrian? What does that mean? Vanessa laughed, a short, bitter sound. It means he doesn't talk to me. It means he's polite and distant and spends 18 hours a day in his office, and when we do have dinner together, which is maybe twice a week, he looks at me like I'm a business expense he's still trying to justify. She set down her wine glass, her sleeve rode up, and Sophia saw it, a bruised dark purple circling Vanessa's wrist like a bracelet. Vanessa. Sophia's voice was very quiet. What happened to your arm? Vanessa yanked her sleeve down. Nothing, I tripped. You tripped and got a bruise that looks exactly like someone grabbed your wrist. I said it's nothing. Is it Adrian? Did he? No, Vanessa's voice cracked. God, no, Adrian has never touched me. He would never. He's not like that. He's not like anyone I've ever met, actually. He's cold and he's distant and he's so polite it makes me want to scream, but he's not cruel. She looked down at her wrist. This was my fault. I threw a vase at the wall, a very expensive vase. He didn't even look up from his laptop. Sophia didn't know what to say. She had spent her entire previous life believing her sister was the lucky one, the beautiful one, the chosen one, the one who got everything Sophia wanted, and now here she was, too thin and trembling, with a bruise she'd given herself and a husband who didn't look up when she destroyed things. Is it really that bad? Sophia asked. Vanessa looked at her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, then Vanessa's expression hardened, the mask sliding back into place so smoothly Sophia almost doubted it had ever slipped. It's fine, Vanessa said. I'm fine, I have everything I wanted, the Chase fortune, the Chase name, a husband who's going to make me the envy of every woman in Connecticut, once I figure out how to make him look at me the way single mothers in hospital waiting rooms look at the man who just paid for their child's surgery. She picked up her wine glass. You should enjoy Harvard, Sophia, really, you earned it. She walked out of the kitchen, the door swung shut behind her. Sophia stood alone by the sink, the towel still in her hands. Through the doorway, she could hear the muffled sound of the television in the living room. Her father was watching a Christmas movie. Her mother was probably on the phone with the florist. Vanessa had gone back upstairs. The Reed family Christmas, unchanged in 22 years, everyone alone together. Later that night, Sophia came downstairs for a glass of water and found her father in the living room, staring at the television. The screen showed a news report. A charity gala in Boston, the kind of event where wealthy people wore expensive clothes and congratulated each other on their generosity. Adrian Chase was on the screen. He was in his wheelchair, positioned at the center of a group of men in tuxedos. A reporter was asking him something. The audio was too low for Sophia to hear, and he was answering with the same controlled composure she remembered from her previous life. But there was something different about him, something sharper. He looked alive in a way she didn't remember, focused, present, like a man who had stopped waiting for something and started building instead. He's changed, Harold said without turning around. Sophia froze. What? Adrian Chase. He's different from when we first met him. The accident changed him, but not the way people think. Harold took a sip of whiskey. He's harder now, but also kinder, somehow, if that makes sense. It did make sense. It made more sense than anything Harold had ever said. When did you meet him? Sophia asked. Before the arrangement, he came to the house. You were at the library. You were always at the library. I don't think you ever knew he was here. Harold paused. He asked about you. Sophia's heart stopped. What? He looked at the family photos in the hallway. The ones from your high school graduation. He pointed to you and said, that one, she looks like she's thinking about something important. Harold swirled his whiskey. I told him you were always thinking about something important. You were the smart one. The smart one, not the pretty one, not the chosen one, the smart one, a consolation prize disguised as a compliment. I should have told you, Harold said quietly. Back then, I should have told you he asked about you. Why didn't you? Harold was silent for a long moment. On the screen, Adrian Chase was shaking hands with someone. A hospital administrator. From the look of it, the camera lingered on his face. His expression was unreadable. Your mother, Harold said finally. She had already decided. Vanessa was the one for the arrangement. Vanessa was the one who could. He trailed off. I'm sorry, Sophia. I've been sorry for a long time. Sophia stood in the doorway, looking at her father's back, at the television screen, at the man in the wheelchair who had once pointed to her photograph and said she looked like she was thinking about something important. She went back upstairs without saying another word. At 6 a.m. on December 26th, she packed her bag and caught the first train back to Boston. Her mother didn't come downstairs to say goodbye. Her father was already in his study, the door closed, Vanessa's bedroom door was shut, and Sophia didn't knock on the train. She stared out the window at the Connecticut landscape sliding past, bare trees, frozen fields, the kind of winter that looked beautiful from a distance and felt like a prison up close. Vanessa's words echoed in her head. You were smarter than me, you got out. But Sophia wasn't sure she'd gotten out of anything. She was starting to suspect that she'd traded one cage for another. A cage built not of arranged marriages and family expectations, but of her own fear. Fear of being wanted, fear of being chosen, fear of the question Adrian had asked her in the library 3 years into a marriage she'd never truly tried to understand. Do you ever think this could be different? She had never given him an answer. She pulled out her phone and searched for news about Chase Industries. There was a new article, an interview with Adrian about the company's expansion into international markets. She read it twice. His words were measured, strategic, the language of a CEO who knew exactly what he was doing. But between the lines she could hear something else. He was building, he was surviving, he was doing all the things she was doing, from the other side of an arrangement that had failed them both. She closed the article and looked out the window. The train was crossing into Massachusetts now. The landscape was changing. The bare Connecticut trees giving way to the denser forests of western Massachusetts. The sky lightening from gray to a pale winter blue. Boston was 40 minutes away. Harvard was waiting, but so was the question, the one she'd been running from for 2 lifetimes. The one that had followed her from a library in Connecticut to a dorm room in Cambridge, from a photograph in a hallway to a television screen in her father's living room. Do you ever think this could be different? She didn't know the answer. She wasn't sure she was brave enough to find out. But for the first time since she'd woken up in her childhood bedroom with 8 years of memories burning in her chest, she let herself admit it. She wanted to know, and that wanting, small as it was, tentative as it was, felt more dangerous than anything she'd ever done. Title: The Case Study. Previous chapter recap. Sophia returned home for Christmas and found her sister Vanessa unraveling, too thin, trembling, confessing that Adrian Chase barely spoke to her. Their father Harold revealed a buried truth. Before the arrangement was formalized, Adrian had visited the Reed house and pointed to Sophia's photo, saying she looked like someone thinking about something important. Main body: the Aldrich competition final case arrived on a Tuesday morning in late March, delivered by email with a subject line that read simply confidential, do not distribute. Sophia opened the attachment in the library, alone. The team meeting wasn't for another 2 hours, but she wanted to see it first, to absorb the problem before anyone else's analysis colored her own. She'd learned in 2 lifetimes that her first instincts were usually right. It was everyone else's opinions that confused her. The case was Chase Industries. She stared at the screen for a full minute before she could breathe. The document was 47 pages of financial statements, organizational charts, market analyses, and strategic challenges, all centered on the company her sister's fiancé had rebuilt from a hospital bed, the company she had lived inside for 4 years in another life, the company she was supposed to help run. The case prompt was deceptively simple: Chase Industries has achieved a remarkable turnaround under CEO Adrian Chase. However, the company faces significant headwinds in 3 key areas: international expansion, succession planning, and public perception of its CEO's disability. Develop a 3-year strategic plan that addresses these challenges while preserving the company's core values and competitive advantages. Sophia closed her laptop, opened it again, closed it. She couldn't do this. She couldn't analyze Adrian Chase's company like a textbook problem when she'd watched him will himself to the window every morning for 4 years, when she'd seen the way his shoulders tensed before board meetings and the way he exhaled, just once, just barely, when they were over, when she knew from a lifetime of not paying attention exactly how he ran his business because she'd been living in the same house while he did it. She thought about requesting a different case. There had to be a conflict of interest. Protocol, but what would she say? I was married to the CEO in a previous life and I have insider knowledge I shouldn't have. They would think she was insane. She would think she was insane if she weren't living it. She opened the laptop again, started reading. The financial statements were familiar, not the specific numbers but the shape of them, the organizational structure. The way the company was divided into divisions that Adrian had built from scratch in her previous life. She'd absorbed this information by osmosis, sitting in the same house while the business ran around her. She'd never realized how much she'd learned. By the time her team assembled in the conference room at 2 p.m., Sophia had filled 12 pages of notes. The case is Chase Industries, Professor Harris announced, confirming what everyone except Sophia had just discovered. For those unfamiliar, it's a fascinating story. CEO was in a near-fatal accident 4 years ago. Paralyzed from the waist down, everyone expected the company to collapse. Instead, he rebuilt it into something stronger than before. The question is, where does it go from here? Derek was already pulling up financial charts on his laptop. Their international revenue is only 12% of total. That's embarrassingly low for a company their size. They need to acquire a foreign competitor, probably in Europe, and integrate the supply chains. That's one approach, Sophia said quietly. You disagree? I think acquisition is the wrong move. She pulled out her notes. Chase Industries built its turnaround on trust, supplier relationships, employee loyalty. The CEO is personally involved in every major partnership. If they acquire a European competitor, they'll spend 3 years dealing with cultural integration and regulatory hurdles, and they'll lose the trust advantage they've built here. Derek raised an eyebrow. That's a very specific analysis for someone who just read the case 47 minutes ago. I've been following the company, Sophia said. It wasn't a lie, technically. Mei Lin leaned forward. What do you suggest instead? Sophia laid out her plan: strategic partnerships instead of acquisitions, a phased international rollout starting with markets where the Chase brand already had recognition, a succession planning structure that leveraged the deep bench of executives Adrian had developed, the ones who had stood by him during the turnaround, and for the public perception challenge. He doesn't need to be cured, Sophia said. He doesn't need to walk. The narrative shouldn't be tragic CEO overcomes disability. The narrative should be brilliant CEO builds empire, period. Stop making the wheelchair the story, make the company the story. The room went quiet. Professor Harris was looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. Where did you get that? He asked. Get what? That insight about the wheelchair, about the narrative. He set down his pen. That's not in the case materials, that's not in any of the public coverage, that's an internal communication strategy that Chase Industries hasn't announced yet. Sophia's blood went cold. I read between the lines. You read between lines that aren't there. Harris studied her for a long moment, then he nodded slowly. All right, build the presentation around that, but I want to talk to you after the competition. The presentation took 3 days to build. Sophia worked 18-hour days, surviving on coffee and the adrenaline of knowing she was good at this, genuinely, provably good. Derek handled the financial modeling, his investment banking background finally proving useful beyond cocktail party anecdotes. Mei Lin built the competitive analysis framework, her quiet precision balancing Derek's tendency to oversimplify, and Sophia handled the strategy. She built the argument the way Adrian would have built it, methodically, relentlessly, with 1,000 small details that added up to an unassailable conclusion. She knew his style because she'd watched him work. Even when she'd pretended not to, she'd seen the way he read reports. Not skimming but absorbing, his eyes moving slowly down the page while his fingers tapped a rhythm on the armrest of his wheelchair. She'd heard the way he spoke to his executives, never raising his voice, never issuing orders, just asking questions that led people to the conclusions he'd already reached. She channeled all of it now. The presentation slides became a mosaic of everything she understood about Adrian Chase, the man he was, the company he'd built, the future he deserved. She never said his name when she was working, she didn't have to, every slide was stamped with it. On the morning of the final presentation, Sophia stood in front of the bathroom mirror in her dorm and put on the one blazer she owned, a navy blue thrift store find that fit her shoulders almost perfectly if she didn't raise her arms too high. She pulled her hair back into a low ponytail, no jewelry, no makeup, the same practical, invisible Sophia she'd always been. She looked at her reflection. The woman staring back was tired. There were shadows under her eyes from 3 days of barely sleeping. Her jaw was tight. The same jaw her mother had always said was too strong for a girl. But her eyes were different. They were the eyes of someone who had stopped waiting for permission. You can do this, she said to the mirror. It was the first time she'd spoken to herself out Loud since the day she'd walked out of the Reed house, she walked into the presentation room at 10 a.m. The judges were already seated, 5 of them, arranged behind a long table like a firing squad. Derek was adjusting his tie. Mei Lin was reviewing the slides one last time. Professor Harris gave Sophia a single nod. The case was Chase Industries. The audience was full of people who would report back to the business world about what they'd heard. And somewhere in a building in downtown Boston, man in a wheelchair had no idea that his estranged almost wife was about to present the most intimate analysis of his company that anyone had ever attempted. Sophia took a breath. Then she began to speak. On presentation day, they won, the judges, a panel of 3 Fortune 500 executives and 2 Harvard Business School deans, called their analysis unusually perceptive and remarkably aligned with Chase Industries' actual strategic direction. Sophia accepted the award with a smile that felt borrowed. Derek clapped her on the shoulder. Mei Lin hugged her. Professor Harris watched her with those unreadable eyes. After the ceremony, he pulled her aside. The strategic partnership model you proposed, he said. The phased international rollout, the communication strategy, they're reading like you have a direct line to Adrian Chase's brain. I don't, Sophia said. It was the truth. She had a direct line to a version of Adrian Chase who existed in a timeline that no longer applied. Harris nodded. I'm not accusing you of anything, I'm just telling you whatever advantage you have, be careful with it. Brilliance is one thing, inside knowledge is another. And if anyone ever asks how you knew what you knew, he paused, have a better answer than I read between the lines. He walked away. Sophia stood alone in the hallway, the award certificate heavy in her hands. That night, she did something she'd been avoiding for months. She sat down in her dorm room and systematically read every article, every interview, every profile ever written about Adrian Chase. The picture that emerged was not the picture she'd carried with her from her previous life. Adrian Chase was not cold. He was contained. A man who had learned the hard way that showing emotion was a vulnerability he couldn't afford. He was not distant. He was deliberate, every word chosen, every action calculated, because the world he operated in punished carelessness. Everything he said was measured, but underneath the measurement was a fierce, quiet passion for the work he did and the people he employed. He talked about his employees the way other CEOs talked about their quarterly earnings. He talked about accessibility not as a cause but as a basic standard of decency. He had funded a research foundation for spinal cord injuries, not in his own name but in his father's. He had donated anonymously to children's hospitals in 3 states. None of this had been public until investigative journalists dug it up. One profile in particular stopped her cold. It was from a business magazine published a year after his accident. The interviewer had asked him what he missed most about life before the wheelchair. Nothing, Adrian had said. The accident gave me clarity before I was running my father's company, after I was building my own, before I trusted the wrong people, after I learned to trust no one. That's not a tragedy, that's an education. The interviewer had pressed, what about walking, don't you miss that? I miss my father, Adrian had replied. Walking is logistics, I've solved logistics. Sophia read that line 3 times. Walking is logistics, I've solved logistics. It was the most Adrian thing she'd ever read. Pragmatic to the point of poetry. Vulnerable in a way that refused to admit vulnerability. This was the man she'd been married to. This was the mind she'd dismissed as cold because she'd never bothered to listen to what it was actually saying. She closed the laptop at 2 a.m. The radiator was silent. It had finally given up for the season outside. The first signs of spring were starting to show. Patches of green where the snow had melted. A single crocus pushing through the mud near the library steps. In her previous life, she had been married to this man for 4 years. She had eaten dinner across from him, attended galas on his arm, lived in his house, and she had never once asked him about the foundation, never once asked about his father, never once looked past the wheelchair and the arrangement and her own resentment to see the person underneath. She closed the laptop at 2 a.m. The radiator was silent. It had finally given up for the season outside. The first signs of spring were starting to show. Patches of green where the snow had melted. A single crocus pushing through the mud near the library steps. She thought about the Aldrich competition. She thought about the strategies she'd proposed. Strategies that had come from knowing Adrian Chase better than she'd ever admitted. She thought about Professor Harris's warning, have a better answer. She didn't have a better answer. What she had was the uncomfortable, growing realization that the man she'd resented for 2 lifetimes was not the man who actually existed. And if that was true, if she'd been wrong about him, what else had she been wrong about? What else had she been wrong about in her entire previous life? The question was too big to answer, so she did what she always did. She turned it into work. She opened her laptop and began outlining her final paper for business strategy. The topic she chose, without quite meaning to, was corporate resilience in the face of leadership crisis. She didn't mention Adrian Chase by name, she didn't need to, every word she wrote was about him. And somewhere in the middle of outlining the third section, she paused and realized she wasn't writing about corporate strategy anymore. She was writing a love letter to a man she'd never really known, in a language he would never read, for a grade that would never matter as much as the truth she was finally admitting to herself. She had been wrong about him, about her marriage, about the choice she'd made when she walked out of the Reed house 8 months ago. She didn't know what to do with that knowledge. She didn't know if there was anything to do. Adrian Chase was engaged to her sister. Their wedding was in 3 weeks. Whatever door might have existed between them had closed the moment. Vanessa had said yes to an arrangement Sophia had refused, but the knowledge was there now, a stone in her chest that she couldn't swallow and couldn't spit out. She had been wrong, and for the first time in 2 lifetimes, she wanted to be right. Title: Letters Never Sent. Previous chapter recap. The Aldrich case competition's final case was Chase Industries, the company run by Sophia's almost husband. Drawing on knowledge from her previous life, Sophia led her team to victory with an analysis so perceptive that her professor warned her to have a better answer. For where her insights came from, researching Adrian's life in depth, she finally understood. The man she'd resented was someone she'd never truly known. Main body: sophomore year began the way freshman year had ended. With work, the Aldrich competition had changed things, not outwardly. She still worked the breakfast shift at the dining hall, still sat in the front row of every class, still lived in the same cramped dorm room with the same unreliable radiator, but the professors looked at her differently now. The other students did too. She had gone from the serious one to the one who won Aldrich, and the difference was measurable in the number of people who said hello to her in the hallway. In September, she was awarded the Cross Fellowship, a full tuition scholarship named after a Harvard alumna who had been the first woman to serve on the Federal Reserve Board. The fellowship came with a stipend. That meant Sophia could quit the dining hall job. She celebrated by buying a new blazer. Not thrift store, this time navy blue. It fit her shoulders perfectly. The fellowship also came with a mentor. Her name was Dr. Evelyn Cross, the daughter of the fellowship's namesake, a visiting professor of psychology who had spent 30 years studying why successful people sabotage themselves. Their first meeting was in Dr. Cross's office on the 4th floor of William James Hall. The room was small and cluttered, filled with books and plants and a single window that overlooked the Charles River. Dr. Cross was in her 60s, with silver hair cut short and eyes that seemed to see things before you'd said them. "Sit down, Sophia," Dr. Cross said, gesturing to a chair that was half buried under a stack of journals. "Tell me why you work so hard." Sophia moved the journals and sat. "I want to succeed." "Yes, I gathered that. Most of the students I mentor want to succeed. What I'm asking is, what are you running from?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Sophia felt the ripples spread through her chest before she could stop them. "I'm not running from anything." Dr. Cross leaned back in her chair. "You work the breakfast shift at the dining hall even though you don't need to anymore. You spend more hours in the library than any undergraduate I've ever tracked. You have no social life, no hobbies. And when I asked your roommate about you, a lovely young woman named Priya, by the way, she said you've never once mentioned your family." She paused. "People who aren't running from anything don't work that hard, Sophia. People who are trying to outrun something do." Sophia was silent for a long moment. Through the window, the Charles River glittered in the September sun. A crew team was practicing. 8 bodies moving in perfect synchronization, the oars rising and falling like wings. "In my family," Sophia said finally, "I was the one who wasn't supposed to want things. My sister was the one who got to want. I was the one who got to work. And now I'm at Harvard. I won the Aldrich competition. I have the Cross Fellowship. I'm doing exactly what I wanted to do." Dr. Cross nodded slowly. "That's a very good answer to a question I didn't ask." "What question did you ask?" "I asked what you're running from. You told me what you're running toward. They're not the same thing." Dr. Cross picked up a pen and wrote something on a notepad. "I'm not going to push you, Sophia. That's not how this works, but I want you to think about something. The past doesn't disappear just because you outrun it. It waits, and eventually, if you don't turn around and face it, it catches up." Sophia left the office feeling like she'd been flayed open and put back together in the wrong order. She walked across campus without seeing anything. Dr. Cross's words echoing in her head. "What are you running from?" She knew the answer. She'd known it since the day she'd woken up in her childhood bedroom with 8 years of memories. She couldn't explain. She was running from Adrian Chase, from the 4 years of marriage she'd spent resenting him, from the question he'd asked her that she'd never answered. from the growing, terrifying possibility that she'd made the biggest mistake of her life, and that it was too late to fix it. The call from her mother came 2 weeks later. On a Thursday evening, Sophia was in the library, working on a paper about behavioral economics, when her phone buzzed with a Connecticut area code. Sophia. Margaret's voice was different, less controlled than usual, almost desperate. You need to come home. What happened? It's Vanessa. The wedding was difficult and now, a pause. The Chase family is asking questions about you, about why you left. They want to know about the original arrangement. Sophia's hand tightened on the phone. What do they want to know? They want to know why the wrong sister married their son. The wrong sister, for words delivered by her mother, without a trace of irony that contained the entire history of Sophia Reed's life. I can't help you, mother. I'm in the middle of midterms. This is your family, Sophia. You cut me off, remember? You told me not to call when I ran out of money. I haven't run out yet. Margaret was silent. Sophia could hear her breathing, short, controlled, the breathing of a woman who was not used to being told no. Fine, Margaret said. But when this all falls apart, when the Chase alliance collapses and your father's company goes under and your sister ends up alone, don't pretend you could have done something. I never pretend, mother. That was always your job. Sophia hung up first this time. She'd never done that before. It felt like cutting a rope she hadn't known she was still holding. She sat in the library for a long time after the call ended. The book in front of her was open to a page about loss aversion, the psychological principle that people feel the pain of losing something twice as intensely as the pleasure of gaining something of equal value. She read the paragraph 3 times without absorbing any of it. Her mother's words kept repeating, the wrong sister, as if Sophia had been a defective product returned to the shelf, as if the Chase family had ordered a specific model and received an inferior substitute. And the worst part, the part that made her stomach clench every time she thought about it, was that she'd believed it too. She'd spent her entire life believing she was the wrong one, the spare, the sacrifice. She'd left Connecticut convinced she was escaping a life she didn't deserve. And now her mother was calling to tell her the Chase family agreed. But something didn't fit. If the Chase family was asking questions about her, if they were wondering why she'd left, that meant someone was thinking about her, someone cared enough to ask. Was it Adrian? The question settled into her chest and made a home there. She tried to evict it with logic. The wedding had happened in April. He was married to Vanessa now. Whatever window might have existed had closed, but logic had never been very good at evicting hope. And hope was what this felt like. Even though she refused to give it that name, she closed the behavioral economics textbook and pulled out her notebook. Across a fresh page, she wrote a single line, what am I running from? Then she wrote the answer. For the first time, honestly, I'm running from the possibility that I was wrong, that he was never the prison I thought he was, that the cage was in my head, and I locked myself inside it, and I've been sitting in the corner of my own cell for 2 years telling myself I'm free. That night, she dreamed about Adrian, not a memory this time. Something new. He was standing not in a wheelchair, in a garden she'd never seen. There were gardenias everywhere, white petals bright against dark green leaves. He was looking at her with an expression she'd never seen on his face in either lifetime, open, warm, unguarded. You never asked, he said. Asked what? Whether I wanted to be different, whether we could be different. He reached out and touched one of the gardenias. A petal fell. You assumed I was the cage, but Sophia, I was the door. She woke up gasping. The radiator was clanking. The room was cold. Outside her window, Cambridge was dark and quiet and absolutely indifferent to the earthquake happening inside her chest. She got out of bed, sat at her desk, opened her laptop. She started writing. It wasn't a paper, it wasn't an assignment, it was a letter. The first honest thing she'd written since she'd woken up in her childhood bedroom with a second chance. She didn't understand. Adrian, I don't know if you remember me. My name is Sophia Reed. I was supposed to marry you 2 years ago. I don't know what they told you about why I left. Probably that I was scared or selfish or not ready. Those things are all true, but they're not the truth. The truth is that I spent my whole life believing I was the extra one, the spare, the sister who wasn't pretty enough or charming enough to deserve the things that came easily to everyone else. When the arrangement was made, I thought I was being given away, traded, sacrificed. I didn't think anyone could actually want me, so I ran. I've spent 2 years at Harvard convincing myself I made the right choice. And in most ways I did. I'm good here. I'm building something. I'm becoming someone I recognize when I look in the mirror. But I've also spent 2 years reading about you, about your company, about the foundation, about the way you talk about your employees and the way you rebuilt your life from a hospital bed. And I've realized something I should have realized 4 years ago when you asked me if we could be different asterisk comma asterisk you weren't the cage I locked myself inside a story about who I was. And I never let myself even try to rewrite it, asterisk comma asterisk I don't know why I'm writing this, you're marrying my sister, or you already have, the wedding was supposed to be in April, I don't know if you're happy, I hope you are, you deserve to be happy, asterisk comma asterisk but I wanted you to know I'm sorry not for leaving, that was right for me but for never looking back, for never asking, for never being brave enough to find out what we could have been, asterisk comma asterisk I hope you're well, I hope the company is thriving. I hope the foundation is changing lives. I hope one day, when I'm not so afraid of the answer, I'll have the courage to send this letter instead of just writing it and deleting it and writing it again. Asterisk comma asterisk until then. Asterisk comma asterisk Sophia asterisk. She read the letter twice. Then she highlighted the entire document and pressed delete. The cursor blinked on the empty page. The radiator clanked outside. The first autumn leaves were falling, yellow and red, spinning down from the trees that lined Harvard Yard. She closed the laptop and went back to bed. She didn't sleep, but she also didn't delete the letter from her mind. It was there, now burned into the walls of her memory, the first honest thing she'd ever said to Adrian Chase. Even if he would never read it, the next morning, she went to Dar Cross's office hours. She didn't have an appointment. She stood in the doorway while Dar Cross was grading papers, and when the older woman looked up, Sophia said, "You asked what I'm running from." Dar Cross set down her pen. "I remember. I'm running from a man I was supposed to marry 2 years ago. I left instead." Sophia's voice was steady, which surprised her. "I thought I was escaping, but I think maybe I was just running from the possibility that he might have actually wanted me, because if he wanted me, if I was worth wanting, then everything I believed about myself for 22 years was wrong." Der Cross was silent for a long moment, then she smiled. A small, knowing smile that made her look younger than her 60-something years. "That," she said, "is the most honest thing any student has ever said to me in this office. Sit down, Sophia, let's talk about what happens when you stop running." And Sophia sat, and for the first time in 2 lifetimes, she let someone help her carry the weight of the question she'd been asking herself since the day she'd woken up in her childhood bedroom. What if I've been wrong about everything? Outside the window, the Charles River glittered. The crew team was practicing again. 8 bodies moving as one, the oars rising and falling like wings, and somewhere in the hollow space between her ribs something shifted. A door that had been locked for 2 lifetimes cracked open. Just an inch. Just enough to let in a single thread of light. Title: The Sisters' Descent. Previous chapter recap. Now a sophomore with the Cross Fellowship, Sophia was challenged by her mentor, Evelyn Cross, to confront what she was running from. Her mother called in desperation. The Chase family was asking questions about the wrong sister. That night Sophia wrote a letter to Adrian she would never send, the first honest thing she'd ever said to him. Main body. The call came on a Sunday morning in February of her junior year. Sophia was in the library. She was always in the library. When her phone buzzed with her father's number, Harold Reed never called in 2.5 years. He hadn't called once. The fact that he was calling now meant something was very wrong. "Sophia." His voice was hoarse, older than she remembered. "It's your sister, she's in the hospital." Sophia closed her laptop. "What happened?" "Nervous exhaustion, that's what they're calling it." A pause. "She collapsed at a charity event. The Chase family's people brought her to Greenwich Hospital. They're saying she hasn't been eating, hasn't been sleeping. The doctors want to keep her for observation. Is she going to be okay?" "I don't know," Harold's voice cracked. "I don't know anything anymore, Sophia. Your mother is, she's not handling it well. Vanessa won't see her. She's asking for you." The words hit Sophia like a physical blow. Vanessa was asking for her. The sister who had taken everything, the arrangement, the fortune, the life Sophia had walked away from, was lying in a hospital bed asking for the one person she'd spent her whole life treating like a shadow. "When can you come?" Sophia looked at the window. It was snowing. A heavy February snow that was burying Cambridge in white. The drive to Connecticut would take 3 hours in good weather. "I'll be there tonight," she said. The Greenwich Hospital psychiatric wing was quieter than Sophia had expected. No chaos, no drama. Just pale green walls and the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the kind of silence that felt manufactured. The silence of a place where emotions were managed carefully, like a controlled burn. Vanessa's room was at the end of the hall. The door was open. Sophia stood in the doorway for a long moment before stepping inside. Her sister was sitting up in bed, staring. At the window, she was wearing a hospital gown that made her look even thinner than she'd been at Christmas. Her hair, the golden hair their mother had called her crowning glory, was limp and unwashed. Her hands were folded in her lap like dead birds. Vanessa. Vanessa turned her head. The movement was slow, heavy, as if her neck couldn't quite support the weight. When her eyes met Sophia's, there was no malice in them, no resentment, just exhaustion so deep it looked like surrender. You came, Vanessa said. You asked. I didn't think you would. Sophia pulled a chair to the side of the bed and sat down. The room smelled like antiseptic and wilting flowers, a bouquet on the windowsill, probably from the Chase family's public relations team. The card was still attached. Get well soon. The Chase Industries family. How long have you been here? Sophia asked. For days. They want to keep me for 2 weeks. Observation. Vanessa laughed, a dry, hollow sound. Observation for what? They can't observe what's wrong with me. There's no medical term for marrying a man who doesn't want you. Vanessa. Do you know what it's like? Vanessa cut her off. Her voice was rising, but she didn't seem to notice. Living in a house where no one looks at you, where your husband wheels past your door every morning and doesn't stop, where the staff treats you like furniture because he treats you like furniture, and they're just following his lead. Sophia didn't answer. She knew what it was like. She had lived it, in a different house, in a different life with the same man. I tried, Vanessa said. I tried to make him love me. I wore the dresses, I planned the dinners, I learned about his company, his foundation, all the things he cares about that aren't me. Do you know what he said when I asked him why he never looks at me? She swallowed. He said, I'm looking at you now, as if that was the same thing. Sophia's chest tightened. She knew that response. It was the most Adrian thing imaginable. Literal to the point of cruelty, honest to the point of devastation. He wasn't trying to hurt Vanessa. He was simply refusing to pretend. The marriage is over, Vanessa said quietly. He's filing for divorce, Marcus. His assistant told me yesterday. Adrian didn't even tell me himself. He sent his assistant. I'm sorry. Are you? Vanessa turned to look at her. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but there was something sharp underneath the exhaustion. You're not sorry, Sophia. You're relieved you got out. You're at Harvard. You're winning awards and getting fellowships and proving to the entire world that you didn't need him. And I'm here in a hospital bed because I married a man who never wanted me in the first place. That's not. He asked about you. Vanessa's voice broke on the last word. At the wedding, during the reception, I was standing right next to him in my wedding dress, and a business associate came up to congratulate us, and he said, Adrian, I heard the other one is at Harvard now, smart girl. And Adrian said, I will never forget this, Sophia. I will never forget the way he said it. He said, yes, she always was. The room was very quiet. The snow was still falling outside the window, thick and silent, blanketing the hospital grounds in white. He said it like he was proud of you, Vanessa whispered. Like he'd been following your career, like you were the one who got away, and he was just waiting for what, I don't know, for you to come back, maybe for you to realize what you left behind. Sophia's throat was tight. Vanessa, I didn't know. Of course you didn't know. You never know anything, Sophia. You're so busy being the smart one that you don't see what's right in front of you. Vanessa turned back to the window. He never wanted me. He never even looked at me, and the worst part, the part that makes me want to scream every time I think about it, is that I knew. Before the wedding, I knew. Mother told me he'd looked at your photo. She told me he'd asked about you, and I thought I could change his mind. I thought if I was pretty enough, charming enough, he'd forget about you. She closed her eyes. A tear slid down her cheek, the first genuine emotion Sophia had ever seen on her sister's face. But he didn't forget. He never forgot, and now I'm here, and you're at Harvard, and the whole world is exactly the way it was always going to be, and I was just in the way. Sophia didn't know what to say. There were no words for this, no adequate response to the crumbling of a person you'd spent your whole life believing was invincible. She reached out and took Vanessa's hand. It was cold and thin, bones wrapped in skin that had once been golden and smooth. You're not in the way, Sophia said. You're just in the wrong story. Vanessa opened her eyes. What does that mean? It means you're not the villain, Vanessa. You're just someone who wanted something so badly she forgot to ask if it was actually what she wanted. Sophia squeezed her hand. I know what that's like. I did the same thing, just in the opposite direction. Vanessa stared at her for a long moment, then she laughed again. But this time it was softer, almost real. When did you get so wise? Dara Cross, she's a psychologist. She makes me answer questions I don't want to answer. I should probably see someone like that. Probably. Vanessa was quiet for a moment, then she said, he never blamed you. You know, for leaving. I tried to make him angry about it. I told him you were selfish, that you'd abandoned the family, that you didn't deserve him. Do you know what he said? She met Sophia's eyes. He said, she made the choice that was right for her. I respect that. Sophia felt something crack inside her chest. A wall she'd built so carefully brick by brick over 2.5 years. He'd respected her choice. He hadn't resented her, hadn't hated her, hadn't spent 2 years nursing a grudge the way she'd spent 2 years nursing hers. He just respected her, let her go, waited. He sounds like a good man, Sophia said quietly. He is, Vanessa said. That's the worst part. If he were cruel or cold or any of the things I told myself he was before the wedding, I could hate him, but he's not. He's just not in love with me, and I don't know what to do with that. I've never been not enough before. The words hung in the air between them. Sophia thought about her own life, a lifetime of being not enough, of being the spare, the sacrifice. She and Vanessa had both been trapped by the same story, just from different angles. Vanessa was trapped by the pain of being not enough for the first time. Sophia was trapped by the habit of believing she'd always been not enough, even when evidence suggested otherwise. They sat in silence for a while, watching the snow fall. It was the longest conversation they'd had since childhood. The first one that hadn't been a competition. Sophia didn't know if it would last. She didn't know if Vanessa would wake up tomorrow and remember she was supposed to hate her. But for right now, in this hospital room with its pale green walls and its wilting flowers and its too quiet silence, they were just two sisters who had both been hurt by the same family, in different ways. Sophia drove back to Cambridge that night. The roads were slick with snow, and the drive took 4 hours instead of 3. She spent most of it replaying Vanessa's words. He said it like he was proud of you, like you were the one who got away. She had spent 2.5 years telling herself she didn't care what Adrian Chase thought of her. She had built an entire identity around the premise that his opinion didn't matter. But apparently it did matter. Apparently it had always mattered. Apparently the reason she'd spent so much energy not caring was because caring would have meant admitting she'd made a mistake. And that was that door she wasn't ready to open. When she got back to her dorm, it was past midnight. She sat at her desk and opened her laptop. She didn't write another unsent letter. Instead, she typed a single sentence into the search bar: Adrian Chase accident investigation unresolved. The results were sparse, but there was something new. An article from a local Connecticut paper published 6 months ago that she'd missed in her earlier research. The headline, * new evidence suggests Chase CEO's accident was not random. * She read the article twice. It detailed tire tread marks that didn't match any known vehicle in the area. A witness who had come forward 3 years after the fact, claiming they'd seen a second car on the stretch of highway where Adrian had crashed. A former Chase Industries board member who had been investigated for fraud and had reportedly threatened Adrian in the weeks before the accident. The article was thin. All speculation, no conclusions, but it confirmed what Sophia had started to suspect. The accident that had put Adrian in a wheelchair was not an accident. Someone had tried to kill him. And he had survived, rebuilt his company, and never once spoken publicly about who might have been responsible. She thought about the foundation he'd started in his father's name. She thought about the children's hospitals he donated to anonymously. She thought about the way he'd looked at her across the library in her previous life, and asked if she ever thought they could be different. Adrian Chase had spent his entire adult life being targeted, betrayed, and underestimated, and through all of it, he had kept building, kept surviving, kept being the person that no one, not Sophia, not Vanessa, not the business rivals who tried to kill him, had ever given him credit for. She closed the laptop and sat in the dark. The radiator was silent, the snow was still falling, and somewhere in Connecticut, a man in a wheelchair was filing for divorce from a woman he'd never wanted, while the woman he had wanted was sitting in a Harvard dorm room, finally slowly beginning to understand. Title: Almost Contact. Previous chapter recap. Vanessa was hospitalized, broken by a marriage to a man who never wanted her. In her hospital bed, she revealed the truth Sophia had been avoiding. Adrian had always wanted Sophia, was proud of her Harvard success, and had never blamed her for leaving. For the first time, Sophia began to understand the full weight of what she'd walked away from. Main body. The invitation arrived in early March, tucked between a credit card offer and a flyer for a campus pizza place. It was printed on heavy cream cardstock, embossed with the Harvard Business School seal, and it was addressed to Sophia Reed, Aldrich competition winner. * You are cordially invited to the 34th Annual New England Business Leadership Summit as a student delegate. Keynote speaker, Adrian Chase, CEO, Chase Industries. * Sophia read the invitation 6 times, then she set it down on her desk and stared at it like it might bite her. Adrian Chase was coming to Boston. He would be speaking at a conference she was invited to. He would be in the same room as her, the same city, the same building, the same air. For the first time in this life, she didn't know if he knew she would be there. She didn't know if he remembered her at all, beyond the photo in the hallway and the almost wife who had disappeared 2.5 years ago. But he had asked about her at his wedding. He had told Vanessa he respected her choice, and now he was coming to Boston, to her city, her world. And she had been invited to watch him speak. She RSVP'd yes before she could talk herself out of it. The summit was held at the Boston Convention Center, a glass and steel monolith that overlooked the harbor. Sophia arrived early, dressed in her navy blazer, the one she'd bought with her fellowship stipend, and a white blouse she'd ironed 3 times. She pinned her student delegate badge to her lapel and walked into the main hall like she was walking into battle. The room was enormous, rows of chairs stretched toward a stage that was bathed in blue light. Business executives in suits that cost more than her entire wardrobe clustered near the coffee stations. Sophia found a seat near the back, close enough to see, far enough to disappear. At 10:00 a.m., the lights dimmed. The conference organizer took the stage and began the introduction. Sophia heard none of it. Her eyes were fixed on the wings of the stage, where a shadow was moving. And then he wheeled onto the stage and the room went silent. Adrian Chase was exactly as she remembered. And completely different, the same sharp cheekbones, the same winter gray eyes, the same dark suit, perfectly tailored. But there was an energy to him now that she didn't remember from her previous life, a presence. When he spoke, his voice filled the room without seeming to try. He talked about resilience, about innovation, about building companies that outlasted their founders. People ask me about the accident, he said, and the room leaned forward. They want to know how I survived, how I rebuilt. The truth is, I didn't survive the accident. The man I was before died on that highway. The man in this wheelchair is someone else. Someone who learned that the only thing you can control is what you build next. Sophia's chest was so tight she could barely breathe. This was the man she'd been married to. This was the mind she'd dismissed as cold, the voice she'd tuned out for 4 years, the presence she'd resented without ever truly seeing. He was brilliant, he was magnetic, he was everything she'd refused to let herself notice. After the speech, there was a reception in the adjacent hall. Sophia didn't plan to go. She told herself she was leaving. She had coursework to do, papers to grade, a life to get back to. But her feet carried her into the reception anyway, past the clusters of executives and the trays of hors d'oeuvres, toward the far end of the room where a crowd had gathered around the keynote speaker. The reception hall was all glass and chrome, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over Boston Harbor. The afternoon light was pale gold, the kind of light that made everything look softer than it was. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne and bite-sized things on toothpicks. The noise was the particular noise of wealth at rest. Low murmurs, occasional laughter, the clink of glasses. Sophia took a glass of water and positioned herself near a pillar, partially hidden like a spy in her own life. She could see the crowd around Adrian shifting, businessmen jockeying for position, a journalist trying to get a quote, a young woman who was probably an intern gazing at him with transparent admiration. He handled all of it with the same calm precision he'd shown on stage, polite, professional, completely in control, but his eyes kept moving, scanning, searching, and Sophia knew, with a certainty that settled into her bones like cold water, that he was looking for her. She saw him. Before he saw her, he was surrounded by businessmen, all of them talking at once, but he wasn't looking at any of them. He was scanning the room. His eyes moved across the crowd with the precision of someone who had learned to read a room the way other people read a book. And then his eyes found hers. The world stopped. It was 5 seconds, maybe 10. It felt like a lifetime. He was looking at her. Not through her, not past her, but at her. And in his eyes was something she'd never seen before. Recognition, not surprise, recognition. As if he'd known she would be here, as if he'd been waiting for her to arrive. Sophia couldn't move, she couldn't breathe, she was pinned in place by the weight of his gaze, and every carefully constructed wall she'd built over 2.5 years was crumbling in real time. He tilted his head, just slightly. A question, is it really you? She didn't answer, she couldn't, her body made the decision before her mind could catch up. She turned and walked out of the reception hall. She walked fast. Too fast, the kind of walking that looked like running, past the coffee stations, past the registration desk, through the glass doors and into the cold March air. She didn't stop until she was 3 blocks away, leaning against a brick wall in an alley that smelled like garbage and regret. Gasping for breath, she had run again. She had been in the same room as Adrian Chase for the first time in this life, and she had run. "What is wrong with you?" she whispered to herself. Her voice was shaking. Her hands were shaking, everything was shaking. She knew what was wrong. She'd known since the day she'd woken up in her childhood bedroom with 8 years of memories she couldn't escape. She was in love with him. She had been in love with him in her previous life. She just hadn't let herself feel it, and now in this life with distance and time and the slow, painful process of honesty, she had finally admitted it to herself. She was in love with a man she'd walked away from, a man who was divorcing her sister, a man who had looked at her across a crowded reception hall like she was the only person in the room. She walked back to campus. The March wind cut through her blazer like it wasn't there. Her student delegate badge was still pinned to her lapel, the name Sophia Reed facing outward like an accusation in her dorm room. She sat on her bed and didn't move for a long time. Priya was in class. The radiator was quiet. The room was empty and cold and exactly what she deserved. She had spent 2.5 years building a life that didn't include Adrian Chase. She had done it deliberately, methodically, the same way she did everything. She had convinced herself that Harvard was enough, that achievement was enough, that success was enough, that being the woman who didn't need anyone was enough. But it wasn't enough. She had looked at him across that reception hall, and every lie she'd told herself had evaporated in the space between one heartbeat and the next. She wanted him. She wanted to know him, the real him, not the memory of him, not the research she'd done on him, but the man himself. She wanted to sit across from him and ask all the questions she'd never asked in her previous life. She wanted to tell him she was sorry for the years of resentment, for walking away without explanation, for never looking back. But he was still married to her sister, or almost divorced. She didn't know the status. She didn't know if he remembered her. The look in his eyes could have been recognition, or it could have been curiosity. A stranger staring too intently at a conference she didn't know. She might never know. That night she called Dark Cross. It was past office hours, but Dark Cross had given her a personal number for emergencies. She'd said Sophia wasn't sure this qualified as an emergency. She called anyway. I saw him, Sophia said when Dark Cross answered. Adrian Chase. He was at a conference. I was there. He looked at me, and I ran. Cross was silent for a moment. Why do you think you ran? Because I was scared, because if I stayed, if I talked to him, everything would change, and I've spent 2.5 years building a life that doesn't include him. If I let him in, I might lose that life. Or, Dr. Cross said gently, you might gain a different one, a better one where you're not running anymore. Sophia closed her eyes through the phone. She could hear Dr. Cross breathing, steady, patient, the breathing of someone who had spent 30 years listening to people confess things they'd never said out loud. He looked at me like he knew me, Sophia said. Not like he recognized my face, like he knew me, like all the things I never said to him he'd figured out anyway. And I wasn't ready. Ready for what? Ready to find out if I was wrong about everything, about him, about me, about the choice I made when I walked out of my parents' house. Sophia's voice cracked. If I was wrong, Dark Cross, then I threw away 4 years of my previous life and 2.5 years of this one for nothing. I walked away from a man who wanted me because I couldn't believe anyone could want me. And if that's true, if that's the real reason I left, then I've been lying to myself for my entire existence. Dark Cross was quiet for a long moment, then she said, Sophia, do you know what the hardest part of therapy is? It's not discovering the truth. It's accepting that the truth was always there and you just weren't ready to see it. You're ready now. That's not a failure, that's progress. What do I do? Sophia whispered. I can't answer that for you, but I can tell you something I've learned. The things we run from don't disappear, they wait, and eventually we have to choose, keep running or turn around. Sophia hung up and sat in the dark outside her window. The first signs of spring were appearing. Buds on the trees, patches of grass where the snow had melted. The city was waking up from a long winter. And somewhere in a hotel room in downtown Boston, a man in a wheelchair was probably looking out at the same skyline, wondering about the woman who had stared at him across a reception hall and then disappeared. She had run from him twice now, once in her previous life emotionally, even when she was physically present, once in this life physically, even when her heart was screaming at her to stay. She didn't want to run a third time, but she didn't know how to stop. She had been running her entire life. From her mother's disapproval, from her sister's beauty, from her own fear of not being enough. Running was the only thing she knew how to do. She lay down on her bed and stared at the ceiling. The radiator was silent, Cambridge was quiet, and somewhere in the space between running and turning around, Sophia Reed began to understand that the hardest thing she would ever have to do wasn't winning a case competition, or earning a fellowship, or graduating from Harvard. It was staying, it was letting herself be seen, it was stopping. She didn't know if she was brave enough. But for the first time in 2.5 years she wanted to try. Title: The Truth About Vanessa. Previous chapter recap. Adrian Chase spoke at a Boston business conference, and Sophia attended as a student delegate. Their eyes met across the reception hall, a moment of electric recognition before Sophia fled. She called Dr. Cross in crisis, finally admitting she might have been wrong about everything. But she still didn't know how to stop running. Main body. The call from her father came 3 weeks after the conference. Sophia. Harold's voice was different this time. Not the hoarse desperation of the hospital call, but something harder, something final. You need to come home now, there are things you need to know. Dad, I have midterms. Sophia. He rarely said her name, he said it twice now, and each repetition was a nail in the coffin of whatever normalcy she'd been clinging to. Please. She drove to Connecticut on a Friday afternoon, the spring landscape blurring past her window in shades of green and gold. The Reed estate looked the same as always, imposing, cold, the kind of house that had witnessed decades of quiet misery and absorbed it into the walls. But something was different this time. The front door was already open when she pulled into the driveway. Her father was alone in the living room. No Margaret, no Vanessa, just Harold Reed, sitting in his armchair. With a glass of whiskey and a manila folder on the coffee table in front of him, he looked 10 years older than the last time she'd seen him. Where's Mother? Sophia asked. Upstairs, she won't come down. Harold gestured to the sofa. Sit. Sophia sat. The folder on the coffee table was thick, worn at the edges. It had the look of something that had been handled many times, opened and closed, read and reread, the contents rearranged by hands that weren't sure what to do with them. Vanessa's divorce is final, Harold said. Adrian Chase filed 2 weeks ago. The settlement was generous, more generous than Vanessa deserved. Frankly, she's moving to Paris next month. She's going to, I don't know, find herself, heal, whatever people do in Paris. That's good, Sophia said. I think, is it good? I don't know what good is anymore. Harold took a long drink of whiskey. What I know is that for 26 years I've let your mother run this family. I thought it was easier. I thought keeping the peace was the same as keeping us together. I was wrong. Sophia didn't say anything. She'd known her father was weak for her entire life. Hearing him admit it didn't change anything. When the Chase arrangement was proposed, Harold continued, it was for you, specifically you. Adrian Chase's legal team had done their research. They wanted the smart one, the one with the academic record, the Harvard acceptance, the potential. They wanted a partner for him, not a trophy wife. Sophia's heart was beating too fast. I know, you told me at Christmas. He pointed to my photo. That's not all. Harold reached into the folder and pulled out an envelope. It was cream-colored, heavy paper, the kind of stationery that cost more than most people's monthly grocery bills. It was addressed to Sophia Reed, in handwriting that was precise and controlled and somehow familiar. This arrived 3 days before the arrangement meeting, Harold said. 3 days before you walked into the living room and announced you were going to Harvard. Your mother intercepted it. She read it and then she destroyed it. Sophia's hands were trembling. What was it? A letter from Adrian Chase to you. Harold held up the envelope. This is a copy. The lawyer's office kept one on file. I found it last month going through old records. I should have found it years ago. I should have looked years ago. Give it to me. Harold handed her the envelope. Sophia took it with hands that didn't feel like her own. The paper was smooth and heavy, the kind of paper that mattered. She opened it. Asterisk, Dear Miss Reed, asterisk, comma, asterisk, I hope you'll forgive the formality of this letter. I'm told that in situations like ours, a personal note is customary. A gesture of goodwill between two people who are about to enter into an arrangement that neither of them asked for. Asterisk, comma, asterisk, I won't pretend this is romantic. It isn't, it's business. And I've spent my entire adult life doing business, so I'll be honest with you. I don't know you, but I've read your academic work. I've read the essay you wrote about economic inequality and corporate responsibility, the one that won the state competition when you were 19. I've seen your transcripts. I've talked to people who know your mind, asterisk, comma, asterisk, and I think, Miss Reed, that you and I might understand each other. Asterisk, comma, asterisk, I'm not looking for a wife who will stand beside me at galas and smile for cameras. I'm looking for a partner, someone who thinks strategically, someone who sees the world the way I see it, as a series of problems to be solved, injustices to be corrected, systems to be improved, someone who might, in time, look at me and see more than a wheelchair. Asterisk, comma, asterisk, I know this is strange, I know we've never met, but I wanted you to know before anything is formalized that I chose you deliberately, not because you were available or convenient or the only option, because you were the one I wanted. Asterisk, comma, asterisk, if you're willing, I'd like to meet you just to talk. No lawyers, no parents, just two people who might have more in common than either of them expects. Asterisk, comma, asterisk, I hope you'll consider it. Asterisk, comma, asterisk, respectfully. Asterisk, comma, asterisk, Adrian Chase, asterisk. Sophia read the letter twice, 3 times, 4 times. Each reading carved something out of her. The carefully constructed narrative she'd been carrying for 3 years. He had chosen her. He had read her essays, he had seen her mind, he had wanted a partner. Not a sacrifice, not a burden, not the acceptable daughter, and her mother had destroyed the letter. Her sister had stepped into the space that was meant for her, and Sophia had walked out of the Reed house believing she was escaping a cage, when in reality, she had been walking away from the only person who had ever seen her clearly. Your mother, Harold said quietly, thought the letter was inappropriate. She said it was too forward, that it proved Adrian Chase was unstable, that a man who wrote letters like that couldn't be trusted to run a company. He paused. She was lying, of course. She just wanted Vanessa to have the arrangement. She always wanted Vanessa to have everything. Sophia couldn't speak. The letter was still in her hands, the words blurring through the tears she refused to let fall. There's more, Harold said. He pulled another document from the folder, a legal filing dense with paragraphs and citations. This is a deposition from the Chase family's lawyer Arthur Webb. You remember him? Sophia nodded. The thin man in the gray suit, the one who'd barely looked at her. Webb testified under oath that the original arrangement specified you by name, not a Reed daughter. You, Sophia Reed. The Chase family had done their due diligence, and you were the only candidate they would accept when you left. When you announced you were going to Harvard, Webb called Adrian directly. He told him the arrangement was falling apart, and Adrian said. Harold paused. He looked at the document, then at Sophia. What did he say? He said, if that's what she wants, let her go, but make sure she has what she needs. Harold's voice cracked. He didn't fight it, Sophia. He didn't demand a replacement. He just let you go, and then your mother swooped in and offered Vanessa instead, and Webb, pressured by your mother, by the business interests, by everyone who cared more about the deal than the people involved, accepted. The room was silent. From upstairs, Sophia could hear the faint sound of a door closing, her mother retreating, as she always did, from the consequences of her choices. He let me go, Sophia whispered. He wrote to me, and I never answered, and he let me go, and then he married my sister, knowing she wasn't the one he wanted. Because what? Because the deal was too important. Because he's a man who does what's necessary, Harold said. Not what he wants. He's been doing what's necessary his entire life, running the company after his father died, rebuilding after the accident, marrying a woman he didn't love because the alliance kept thousands of people employed. He set down his whiskey. I've been doing what's necessary too, keeping the peace, staying quiet, letting your mother make every decision. He looked at Sophia. I'm done with that. Sophia stared at the letter, the words blurred and sharpened and blurred again. She thought about the photograph in the hallway, the one Adrian had pointed to. She thought about the question he'd asked her in the library of the Chase estate. Do you ever think this could be different? He had been asking her for years. In letters, in glances, in questions she'd refused to answer. And she had never heard him. She had been so certain of her own unworthiness that she had mistaken being chosen for being trapped. I thought I was the sacrifice, she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. My entire life, I thought I was the one who didn't matter. Sophia sat motionless on the sofa. The letter was still in her hands. Adrian's words, I chose you deliberately, burned behind her eyes. She had spent 3 years believing she was the wrong sister, the spare, the sacrifice. She had built an entire second life around the premise that leaving was freedom, that Harvard was the answer to a question no one had asked. But the truth she had been running from since the day she'd woken up in her childhood bedroom with 8 years of memories burning in her chest, was that she had been chosen specifically, deliberately, by a man who had read her essays and seen her mind and wanted to know her. And she had walked away without even knowing he'd reached out. I need to go, she said. Her voice was strange, distant, like it belonged to someone else. Sophia, I need to go. She stood up. Her legs were unsteady. The envelope was still in her hands, the letter inside, the words that had been waiting for her for 3 years. I can't be here right now. Harold nodded. He didn't try to stop her. She walked out of the Reed house for the second time in her life. But this time she wasn't running toward something. She was running away from the collapse of everything she'd believed about herself. Away from the truth that had been sitting in a lawyer's filing cabinet for 3 years while she convinced herself she was unwanted. Away from the knowledge that the man she'd resented, the man she'd fled, the man who had looked at her across a crowded reception hall with recognition in his eyes, that man had chosen her. The drive back to Cambridge was 6 hours. She spent most of it crying, not the kind of crying she'd done as a child. The silent tears of a girl who'd learned that showing emotion was a weakness. This was different. This was a collapse, a breaking, the kind of crying that came from the center of your chest and didn't stop until your body was empty. She cried for the girl who had believed she was the spare, For the years she'd spent resenting a marriage she'd never tried to understand, for the letter she'd never received, the words she'd never read, the man who had chosen her and let her go because she'd asked to be let go. She cried for her father, who had spent 26 years being weak and was finally too late trying to be strong. She even cried for Vanessa, the sister who had been told her whole life that beauty was the only currency that mattered, and who had discovered too late that it didn't buy love. By the time she reached Cambridge, it was past midnight. The campus was quiet, her dorm room was dark, Priya was asleep, her breathing soft and rhythmic in the next bed. Sophia sat at her desk and opened her laptop. The letter from Adrian was still in her hand. She'd held it the entire drive, the paper now creased and damp from the tears she'd finally let fall. She read it one more time, the words she'd memorized by now, the words that changed everything. I chose you deliberately, not because you were available or convenient or the only option, because you were the one I wanted. And then she opened a blank document and began to type. Title: The letter he wrote. Previous chapter recap. Summoned home by her father, Sophia discovered the devastating truth. Before the arrangement was formalized, Adrian Chase had written her a personal letter, choosing her specifically, deliberately. Her mother intercepted and destroyed it. Her father had finally found a copy, reading Adrian's words 3 years too late. Sophia's core belief that she was the unwanted spare shattered completely. Main body. She didn't sleep that night. The letter sat on her desk, illuminated by the pale glow of her laptop screen. She had memorized it by now, every word, every comma, every carefully chosen phrase. I chose you deliberately, not because you were available or convenient or the only option, because you were the one I wanted. At 3 a.m., she stopped staring at the letter and started writing her own. The words came slowly at first, then faster. A dam breaking after 3 years of pressure. She wrote about the girl she'd been before the arrangement, the one who'd believed she was the spare. She wrote about the morning she'd woken up in her childhood bedroom with 8 years of memories from a life she'd never lived. She didn't try to explain the rebirth. She didn't know how, but she told him the truth about everything else, the resentment, the running, the slow realization that she'd been wrong about him. She wrote about the conference, about seeing him on stage and feeling the floor drop out from under her, about their eyes meeting across the reception hall and the way she'd fled because staying would have meant admitting everything she'd been trying not to feel. She wrote about the letter, his letter, the one her mother had destroyed, the one she'd finally read 3 years too late. She told him that she'd memorized every word, that I chose you deliberately had rewired something in her brain that had been broken since childhood. She wrote until the sun came up. The radiator had been silent for hours. Priya had stirred once, murmured something in her sleep, and gone still again. Outside the window, Cambridge was waking up. The first students crossing the quad, the first birds singing, the first pale light of a spring morning that felt nothing like the winter Sophia had been living in. When she finished, she read the letter twice. It was too long, too raw, too honest. It was everything she'd never said to anyone, poured onto a page in the desperate hope that the man who'd written to her 3 years ago was still the man who would read this now. She didn't let herself think about whether he would. She didn't let herself think about the divorce or Vanessa, or the 1,000 reasons why this was a terrible idea. She just printed the letter, signed her name at the bottom, and sealed it in an envelope addressed to Adrian Chase at Chase Industries headquarters in Boston. She walked to the campus post office at 7 a.m. The clerk wasn't there yet. She sat on the steps outside and waited, the envelope clutched in her hands, her heart beating so hard she could feel it in her teeth. At 7:30, the clerk arrived. Sophia handed over the envelope. The clerk weighed it, stamped it, tossed it into a bin with 1,000 other letters. That'll be 55 cents. The clerk said. 55 cents, 3 years of running, 2 lifetimes of hiding, and the cost of finally stopping was 55 cents. Sophia paid in exact change. Then she walked back to her dorm, crawled into bed, and slept for 14 hours. She woke to a voicemail from an unknown number. Miss Reed, this is Marcus Chun. I'm Adrian Chase's personal assistant. Mr. Chase received your letter this morning. He would like to know if you're available to meet. Please call me back at your earliest convenience. Sophia listened to the message 3 times. Marcus Chen's voice was calm and professional, the voice of someone who had delivered 1,000 messages far more important than this one. He didn't sound surprised. He didn't sound judgmental. He sounded like a man who had been waiting for this call. She called him back at 9 a.m. Miss Reed, Marcus said. Thank you for calling. Mr. Chase is in Boston this week. He would like to meet you for coffee if you're amenable. Thursday, 3 p.m. There's a cafe called The Daily Grind on Beacon Street. Quiet, private. He thought you might prefer somewhere neutral. Neutral, of course Adrian had thought of that. Of course he had considered what would make her comfortable. Even now, even after everything. I'll be there, Sophia said. Very good, I'll confirm with Mr. Chase, he's looking forward to it. Sophia hung up and stared at her phone. He's looking forward to it, 3 years, 2 lifetimes, 1 letter, and Adrian Chase was looking forward to meeting her for coffee. The 3 days between the call and Thursday were the longest of Sophia's life. She went to class but absorbed nothing. She sat in the library but read no books. She lay in bed at night and stared at the ceiling and rehearsed 1,000 conversations that would never happen. On Thursday morning she put on her navy blazer, the one that fit, and a pale blue blouse. She pulled her hair back. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. The woman looking back was different from the girl who'd walked out of the Reed house 3 years ago. She was older, tired. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. But there was something else too, something steadier, something that looked almost like peace. She walked to the daily grind through a light spring rain. The cafe was exactly as Marcus had described, quiet, private, tucked between a bookstore and a vintage clothing shop on a street that tourists never found. The windows were steamed from the espresso machine. The tables were small and wooden. There was a single other customer, an old man reading a newspaper in the corner, and at a table by the window in his wheelchair was Adrian Chase. He saw her before she saw him. When she walked through the door he was already looking at her, the same way he'd looked at her across the reception hall, the same way he'd looked at her in the library of the Chase estate in another life, like she was the only person in the room, like he'd been waiting. She walked to his table. Her legs were unsteady, her heart was a drum. Miss Reed, Adrian said. Mr. Chase? A pause, then, almost imperceptibly, the corner of his mouth lifted. I think we're past the formalities, don't you? Sophia sat down. The chair was wooden and slightly too low, which put her at eye level with him. A small thing, but she noticed it. She noticed everything about him now, the sharp line of his jaw, the way his hands rested on the arms of his wheelchair, still and deliberate, the winter-gray eyes that had followed her across a reception hall and apparently across 3 years. I got your letter, she said. I got yours. They looked at each other. Around them, the cafe hummed with quiet activity, the espresso machine hissing, the old man turning a page of his newspaper. But for Sophia, the world had shrunk to the space between their table and the window, the rain on the glass, the man in the wheelchair who had chosen her 3 years ago and was sitting across from her now. I'm sorry, she said. For not answering, for not knowing, for everything. You didn't know, you couldn't have known. He paused. Your mother is a remarkably effective gatekeeper. You knew about the letter, that she destroyed it. I suspected. Webb told me eventually, after the wedding. Adrian's expression didn't change, but something in his voice tightened. By then it was too late to undo anything without causing more damage than the truth was worth, so I waited. 3 years. I'm a patient man, Sophia, I've had to be. The use of her first name, not Miss Reed, but Sophia, hit her like a physical thing. She took a breath, let it out. Your letter, she said. The one you wrote me. You said you chose me deliberately, that you saw my essays, my transcripts, that you wanted a partner. I meant every word. But you didn't know me, you'd never met me, how could you have known? Adrian was quiet for a moment. Outside, the rain was picking up, heavier now, tapping against the window in a rhythm that sounded almost like music. I didn't know you, he said. I knew of you, I knew your mind, the way you thought, the things you cared about. I knew you'd been accepted to Harvard and deferred because your family asked you to. I knew you'd spent your entire life being told you were the smart one, not the pretty one, as if those things were mutually exclusive. He paused. I knew what it felt like to be underestimated, to be seen as one thing, a disability, a burden, a liability, when the truth was something else entirely. I thought we might understand each other. We did, Sophia said quietly. We do. I just didn't let myself see it. She told him then, not everything. She couldn't tell him about the rebirth, about the previous life, about 4 years of marriage that had never happened in this timeline, but she told him about the girl she'd been, the one who believed she was the spare, the one who walked out of the Reed house thinking she was escaping a cage, only to discover 3 years later that the cage had been inside her own head. She told him about Harvard, about the Aldrich competition, about Dar Cross and the questions she'd been asked that she didn't want to answer. She told him about the conference, about seeing him on stage and feeling the world tilt, about running again because running was easier than staying, and she told him about his letter, the copy her father had found, the words she'd memorized, the way every brick in the wall she'd built had crumbled the moment she'd read I chose you deliberately. When she finished, Adrian was silent for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and took her hand. His fingers were warm, strong, the hands of a man who had pulled himself through physical therapy and rebuilt a company from a hospital bed. He held her hand like it was something precious, something he'd been waiting to hold for a very long time. "I've been following your career," he said. "The Aldrich competition, the cross-fellowship, your paper on market disruption. I read it. You're remarkable, Sophia. You always were." "You read my paper." "I read everything you've written that's publicly available. I wanted to know you, even if you never came back, even if you never knew I was watching." The tears came before she could stop them, not the racking sobs of the drive back from Connecticut, quieter tears, the kind that came from relief rather than grief. She had spent her entire life believing she was unwanted, and here, across a cafe table on a rainy Thursday afternoon, was a man who had spent 3 years reading her academic papers because he wanted to know her mind. "I don't know what happens now," she said. "Neither do I." Adrian squeezed her hand. "I'm not asking you for anything, Sophia. I just wanted you to know I chose you once, I would choose you again, but this time, it's your choice. If you want to walk away, I'll understand. I'll let you go again." His voice was steady, but his eyes, those winter gray eyes, were not. "But if you want to stay, I would like that. I would like that very much." Sophia looked at their hands, his covering hers, warm and steady and real. She thought about the girl who had walked out of the Reed house 3 years ago, so certain, so afraid. She thought about the woman she'd become, the one who won case competitions and earned fellowships and finally stopped running. "I've spent my entire life making choices based on what I thought I deserved," she said. "Which was never very much, I think. I think it's time I started making choices based on what I want." "And what do you want?" She turned her hand over in his, interlaced her fingers with his, looked him in the eyes, those eyes she'd misread for 2 lifetimes and was finally learning to see. "I want to stay," she said. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, the espresso machine hissed, and at a table by the window, 2 people who were supposed to have found each other 3 years ago finally stopped waiting. Title: The Meeting. Previous chapter recap. Sophia wrote to Adrian, a raw, honest letter telling him everything she'd never said in 2 lifetimes. He responded immediately through his assistant Marcus Chan, asking to meet over coffee at a quiet Boston cafe. They talked for the first time as equals. Adrian confessed he'd been following her career for 3 years. When he took her hand and said, "I chose you once, I would choose you again," Sophia finally stopped running. Main body. They didn't rush. That was the first thing Sophia noticed. The thing that surprised her most about Adrian Chase when he wasn't being a CEO or a symbol or a memory. He didn't rush. He had spent 3 years waiting for a letter she'd never known to write. Now that she was here, he seemed perfectly content to let things unfold at whatever pace she needed. They met for coffee again the following week, and the week after that. The cafe on Beacon Street became their place. The same table by the window, the same quiet corner, the same old man reading his newspaper. The barista learned their orders: black coffee for him, a cappuccino with an extra shot for her. She stopped calling him Mr. Chase. He started calling her Sophia, the way someone might say a word they'd been practicing in private for years. They talked about everything: business strategy. She told him about the Aldrich competition, leaving out the parts about how she channeled his management style. He told her about the accident, the real story, the one that wasn't in any news article: a business rival, a truck on a rural highway, 3 months in the hospital and a year of physical therapy, the slow, grinding process of accepting that he would never walk again. "I was angry for a long time," he said. One afternoon in late April, the rain was falling outside, a soft, steady drizzle that blurred the city into watercolor. "Not at the person who did it, I dealt with that legally, but at myself, at my body for failing me." "How did you stop?" "I didn't." He looked at her. "I just started being angry at things I could change instead of things I couldn't. Turns out there are a lot of things you can change once you stop focusing on the one thing you can't." Sophia thought about that for a long time, thought about the years she'd spent being angry at her mother, at her sister, at the arrangement, at the whole unfair architecture of a life she'd been born into. She'd been so focused on what she didn't have: beauty, approval, the easy love that seemed to come naturally to Vanessa, that she'd never noticed what she did have: a mind that worked, a hunger to learn, a man who had read her essays and seen her clearly, even when she refused to see herself. "You do that too," she said. "Don't you? You read people the way you read business cases. You see the thing they're not saying. It's a survival mechanism. When you can't run, you learn to observe." "Is that what you were doing at the conference, observing?" Adrian's mouth quirked. "I was looking for you. I knew you'd be there." Marcus checked the delegate list. Sophia felt her face flush. "You knew I would be there?" "I hoped. I was fairly certain." He paused. "You ran?" "I always run." You stopped? She looked at their hands on the table, not touching but close. The space between them was the width of a coffee cup in 3 years of mischances. I'm trying, she said. To stop running, hiding, all of it. How's that going? She looked up at him. Ask me again in a year. Ask you what? Whether I'm still here. The words hung in the air between them. They weren't a promise, not quite, but they were the closest thing to hope that Sophia had ever let herself feel. Adrian nodded once. Slowly, he didn't push, he never pushed, he just waited, patient as a mountain, while she figured out how to stop being the girl who ran. Spring turned to summer. Sophia finished her junior year with a 3.9 GPA and a research assistantship with Professor Harris, the same professor who had warned her about having a better answer for her insights. He'd never asked again. She suspected he'd figured out the truth, or enough of it, and had decided some answers weren't worth pursuing. She saw Adrian twice a week now, sometimes at the cafe, sometimes at his office in downtown Boston, a glass-walled corner on the 42nd floor of the Chase Industries building, redesigned after the accident to be fully accessible, wide doorways, lowered counters, a desk that adjusted to his height. Nothing in the room said tragedy, everything said adaptation. She learned the rhythms of his life, the morning calls with his international offices, the physical therapy sessions he still did 3 times a week, even though the doctors had said further improvement was unlikely. Unlikely isn't impossible, he'd said when she'd asked, and the habit keeps me disciplined. The way he always sent his assistants home by 6 p.m., even when he stayed later himself. She learned other things too, smaller things that no business profile would ever capture. The way he took his coffee black but secretly preferred tea, a habit from his British grandmother. The way he tapped his index finger against his wheelchair armrest when he was thinking, a rhythm as constant as a heartbeat. The way he never interrupted her, never talked over her, never made her feel like her opinions were anything less than essential. In a world full of men who had spent her entire life underestimating her, Adrian Chase was the first man who had ever made her feel like her mind was the most important thing about her. One evening in late July, he took her to the rooftop garden of the Chase building, a private terrace that had been designed for accessibility, with wide paths and raised flower beds and a view of the entire Boston skyline. The gardenias were in bloom, white petals, dark green leaves, the same flower she'd arranged in a vase in her previous life without knowing why she was drawn to them. These are my favorite, she said, touching one of the petals. I know, Adrian said quietly. She turned to look at him. How? Marcus did his research before the arrangement. Your college application essays, you mentioned gardenias in one of them, something about your grandmother's garden. I remembered. He paused. I remember everything about you, Sophia, even the things you've never told me. Her throat tightened. You read my college application essays? Every one. You wrote about resilience as an economic principle, about systems that survive because they adapt. It was the smartest thing I'd ever read from someone your age. He looked at the gardenias. I knew then, before I ever met you, I knew you were the one I wanted. The city spread out below them, glittering in the summer twilight. The gardenias released their fragrance into the warm air, and Sophia Reed, who had spent her entire life believing she was unwanted, stood in a rooftop garden with a man who had read her college essays and remembered her favorite flowers and chosen her 3 years before she'd ever chosen herself. How do you do it? She asked one evening. They were in his office, the summer sun setting over the Boston skyline, painting the city in shades of orange and gold. The company, the foundation, the constant pressure. How do you not break? Adrian was quiet for a moment. The sunset light caught his face, softening the sharp angles of his jaw. I broke already, he said. On that highway 4 years ago. Everything since then has been reconstruction. You don't build the same thing twice. You build something stronger, something that already knows where the weak points are. Is that what I'm doing? Sophia asked. Reconstructing? I don't know, are you? She thought about it. The girl who had walked out of the Reed house, the woman who had run from the conference, the person sitting in this office now, watching the sunset with a man who had chosen her 3 years ago and was still choosing her now. I think, she said slowly, I'm building something new, not reconstructing, not the same foundation at all, something that doesn't have all the cracks the old one did. Adrian looked at her. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, those winter gray eyes, were not. That sounds like progress. It feels like terror. Good terror means you're doing something that matters. She laughed, a real laugh surprised out of her. Is that your management philosophy? Make your employees terrified? My employees aren't terrified, my employees are motivated. A pause. You're not my employee? No, I'm not. The words sat between them, heavier than they should have been. Sophia's heart was beating too fast, the sunset was fading, the orange giving way to purple, the city lights beginning to flicker on across the skyline. She stood up. I should go, it's late. Adrian nodded. I'll walk you out. He wheeled beside her through the quiet office. The assistants had gone home hours ago, and the floor was empty except for the cleaning staff. The elevator ride was silent, the lobby was silent outside. The summer night was warm and soft, the kind of night that made cities feel like possibilities. His car was waiting at the curb, a black sedan with a driver who had been with the Chase family for 20 years. Sophia had met him twice. His name was Robert. He never asked questions. I can take the tea, Sophia said. It's late, Robert will drive you. I'm fine, really. Sophia. Adrian's voice was gentle but firm. Let someone take care of you just this once. She opened her mouth to argue, to say that she'd been taking care of herself for 3 years, that she didn't need anyone, that she was fine, she was always fine. But the words didn't come because standing on the sidewalk in the summer dark, the city humming around them, Adrian looking up at her with those eyes that had followed her across a reception hall and across 3 years and across 2 lifetimes, she realized she didn't want to argue, she wanted to be taken care of just this once. Okay, she said. Adrian nodded. He reached out, a small movement, almost hesitant, and took her hand. His fingers were warm, the contact was simple and electric, and Sophia felt it all the way up her arm and into the center of her chest. It started to snow. No, that wasn't right. It was summer, it couldn't be snow, but something was falling, soft and white, drifting down from the sky like the world had gotten its seasons confused. Sophia looked up. Cottonwood seeds. The tree by the curb was releasing them into the warm night air, and they were floating down around them like a summer snowstorm. Adrian was still holding her hand. She looked down at him, he looked up at her. I should go, she whispered. Yes, he said. Neither of them moved. The moment stretched. 2 seconds, 5, 10. The cottonwood seeds drifted around them like confetti. The city hummed. Robert waited patiently in the car, looking straight ahead. Adrian's thumb moved across the back of her hand. A tiny motion, almost unconscious. Sophia felt her breath catch. She wanted to lean down. She wanted to close the space between them. She wanted to find out what those winter-gray eyes looked like from an inch away. But she didn't, not yet, not tonight. Some things needed to be earned, and she was still learning how to stop running. She squeezed his hand once, then she let go. Thursday, she said. Thursday. He agreed. She got into the car. Robert pulled away from the curb, and through the rear window Sophia watched Adrian Chase sit on the sidewalk in a storm of cottonwood seeds. His hand still raised in the ghost of a gesture. Watching her go, he didn't look away until the car turned the corner. Neither did she. That night in her dorm room, Sophia lay awake and thought about his hand, the warmth of it, the way his thumb had moved across her skin like a question he was still waiting for her to answer. She thought about the cottonwood seeds falling like snow in summer. She thought about the word Thursday, an ordinary word, a day of the week, and somehow the most important word she'd ever said. She had stopped running. It was terrifying. It was the hardest thing she'd ever done, but it was also, and this was the part that surprised her most, it was the first thing in 2 lifetimes that had ever felt completely, absolutely right. Title: The Return. Previous chapter recap. Through spring and summer of her junior year, Sophia and Adrian built something new, slow, careful, real. She learned the rhythms of his life, his hidden kindnesses, the way he'd read her college essays years before they'd ever met, on a summer night. Outside his office, surrounded by drifting cottonwood seeds, they shared an almost kiss. Her hand in his, the word Thursday, a promise neither of them needed to explain. Main body. Graduation day arrived on a morning in late May. The kind of morning that New England reserved for its most important ceremonies. Clear sky, soft breeze, the air smelling like freshly cut grass and possibility. Sophia stood in Harvard Yard with 300 other seniors, all of them wearing identical black gowns and crimson sashes. Her cap was pinned to her head with more bobby pins than she'd ever used in her life. The tassel kept swinging into her eyes. Her hands were sweating inside her graduation gown. She scanned the crowd. The rows of folding chairs were packed with families, parents clutching cameras, grandparents fanning themselves with programs, siblings who had been dragged along and were already checking their phones. She didn't look for her own family. She knew they wouldn't be there. Her mother hadn't called since the divorce. Her father had sent a card, a brief, awkward note that said "I'm proud of you" in handwriting that looked like it had cost him something. Vanessa was in Paris, presumably. Sophia hadn't heard from her since the hospital, but she wasn't looking for them. Her eyes found the accessible seating area near the front, and there he was, Adrian Chase, in a dark suit that fit him like armor. his wheelchair positioned at the end of a row. He was watching the stage. But as if he felt her gaze, he turned his head. Their eyes met across the sea of black gowns and crimson sashes. He smiled. It was a small smile. Adrian didn't do large gestures. But it was real. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting for this moment almost as long as she had. Sophia smiled back. Her face felt strange, the muscles pulling in directions they weren't used to. She'd smiled more in the past year than she had in the previous 25 combined. It was still a new sensation. She was learning to like it. The ceremony began. The speeches were the kind of speeches that graduation ceremonies always had. Inspiring, forgettable, full of words like future and potential and the next chapter. Sophia barely heard them. Her mind was already somewhere else. In the library where she'd spent 1,000 nights. In the dining hall where she'd served scrambled eggs. In the dorm room with the unreliable radiator that had somehow become home. When her name was called. Sophia Lynn Reed, summa cum laude. She walked across the stage with her head up and her shoulders back. The dean shook her hand. The crowd applauded. Somewhere in the audience Priya was probably crying. Somewhere in the accessible seating Adrian Chase was watching her with an expression she finally understood. She had done it for years, 2 lifetimes. She had done it. After the ceremony the yard dissolved into chaos. Families reuniting, cameras flashing, the particular pandemonium of 400 graduates all trying to find their people at the same time. Sophia stood at the edge of the crowd, her diploma clutched in her hands and waited. She didn't have to wait long. Adrian wheeled toward her through the crowd. People parted for him automatically. Not out of pity, but out of the instinctive respect that his presence commanded. When he reached her, he was holding something in his hand, a single gardenia. "I thought about bringing roses," he said. "But that seemed excessive. And you've never struck me as a roses kind of woman." Sophia took the gardenia. The petals were white and perfect, the fragrance familiar in a way that made her chest ache. "How did you know these were my favorite?" "You wrote about them in your Harvard application essay, the one about your grandmother's garden." He paused. "I requested a copy from the admissions office 3 years ago. You hacked into Harvard's admissions database. I made a donation. They were very accommodating." Sophia laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her. "You're ridiculous. I'm thorough." He tilted his head, looking up at her. "Congratulations, Sophia, you earned this, every part of it." "Not every part," she looked at him. "Some parts one just got lucky. Luck had nothing to do with it. You chose Harvard, you chose to stay, you chose..." He paused. "You chose to stop running. That wasn't luck, that was courage." The word courage sat between them, warm and solid. Sophia thought about the girl who had walked out of the Reed house 4 years ago. That girl had been brave in the way that desperate people are brave. All momentum and no direction. This woman, the one standing in Harvard Yard with a diploma in one hand and a gardenia in the other, was brave in a different way. She was brave enough to stay. "Walk with me," she said. They left the chaos of the yard behind. Sophia walked slowly, matching her pace to his wheelchair, the gardenia still in her hand. They crossed the campus in companionable silence. Past the library where she'd spent 1,000 nights. Past the dining hall where she'd served breakfast. Past the dormitory with the unreliable radiator. They ended up at a bench near the Charles River. The afternoon light was golden. The kind of light that made everything look like a memory in the making. The river glittered. The crew teams were still practicing. 8 bodies moving as one. Sophia sat down on the bench. Adrian positioned his wheelchair beside her. They looked out at the water together. "What happens now?" she asked. "Whatever you want." He paused. "I've waited this long, I can wait longer." She turned to look at him. His profile was sharp against the golden light. The same profile she'd glimpsed in the library of the Chase estate in another life. But everything else was different. She was different. He was different. The world between them was different. No longer a cage, no longer a burden, no longer anything but possibility. "I'm done waiting," she said. She leaned toward him. He reached up. Their faces were inches apart. Close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his winter gray eyes. Close enough that she could feel his breath on her cheek. "Is this okay?" she whispered. "It's more than okay." His voice was rough. "It's the only thing I've wanted for 4 years." She closed the distance. The kiss was brief. Not the kind of kiss that happened in movies, not dramatic or sweeping or accompanied by orchestral music. It was a real kiss. The kind of kiss that happened between 2 people who had taken the long way to find each other and were finally ready to arrive. His lips were warm. Her hand found his shoulder. The shoulder she had watched tense before board meetings in another life. The shoulder that had supported the weight of a company and a legacy and a body that had survived the unsurvivable. When they pulled apart, Neither of them spoke, the river glittered, the crew teams rowed, the world continued turning. And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, Sophia didn't feel like she was being left behind. I have a question, Adrian said. Ask. Your letter, the one you sent me, you said some things that I've been thinking about for months. He paused. You wrote about a previous life, about 4 years of marriage that you remembered, about choices you made that you regretted. Sophia's heart stopped. She had been so careful in her letter, so deliberately vague, but Adrian Chase didn't miss details. He had read her letter the way he read everything, thoroughly. Precisely, missing nothing. Adrian, you don't have to explain, he said. Whatever happened, whatever you remember or believe or carry with you, it doesn't change anything. You're here now, that's what matters. But what if I told you that I was your wife once in another life, that I spent years resenting you because I couldn't see past my own fear? He was silent for a moment. The river whispered, the sun sank lower. Then I would say you're here now, and this time you see me. That's more than I ever had before. The tears came without warning, the kind of tears that didn't ask permission. She had spent so long being afraid of the truth, afraid of what he would think if he knew. And here he was, not asking for explanations, not demanding proof, just accepting, choosing her again, the same way he'd chosen her 4 years ago, before either of them knew what they were getting into. I love you, she said. It was the first time she'd said it, to him, to anyone in either lifetime. The words felt strange in her mouth, like a language she was learning for the first time. I don't know when it started, maybe in the library in my previous life, when you asked me if we could be different, maybe at the conference when you looked at me across the reception hall, maybe just now on this bench, but I love you. I've never said that to anyone before. I wanted you to know. Adrian reached up and touched her face, his thumb brushed away a tear. I know, he said. I've known for a long time. I was just waiting for you to catch up. She laughed through the tears. You're infuriatingly patient. It's my best quality. He lowered his hand. The gardenia was still in her other hand, the petals beginning to wilt slightly in the afternoon warmth. I love you too, Sophia. I've loved you since I read your college essays, since I saw your photograph in the hallway of your parents' house, since you walked into a cafe on Beacon Street and finally stopped running. They sat together as the sun set over the Charles River. His hand rested on hers. The gardenia lay on the bench between them. The campus emptied out around them. The last graduates drifting away. The last families packing up their cars. The last echoes of the ceremony fading into the quiet of a New England evening. Sophia thought about her previous life, about the hospital room where she'd died alone, about the flowers Adrian had sent that she'd told the nurse to take away, about all the years she'd wasted resenting a man who had never done anything except try to reach her. And she thought about this life, the morning she'd woken up in her childhood bedroom, the train to Boston, the dining hall shifts and the library nights and the case competition that had changed everything, the letter, the cafe, the gardenias on the rooftop, the cottonwood seeds falling like snow in summer. She had been given a second chance and she had used it, not perfectly. She had run and hidden and made mistakes, and taken years to learn what should have been obvious from the start, but she had used it. She had built a life that was hers, and now, sitting on a bench by the river with a man who had loved her across 2 lifetimes, she was finally, completely at peace. What about the company? She asked. The foundation, all the things you're responsible for. What about them? I don't want to be another thing you have to manage, another responsibility. Adrian turned to look at her. You're not a responsibility, Sophia. You're a choice, the first choice I've made for myself in a very long time. Everything else, the company, the foundation, the legacy, those are obligations. You're something else. What? He considered the question. The sun was almost gone now, just a thin line of gold on the horizon, the river turning from blue to silver to dark. You're the reason, he said finally. For all of it, the surviving, the rebuilding, the waiting, even when I didn't know if you'd ever come back, even when I thought I'd lost you, you were always the reason. She didn't have words for that. There were no words for that. So she did the only thing that made sense. She leaned over and kissed him again, longer this time, deeper, the kind of kiss that said everything words couldn't. When they broke apart, the first stars were coming out. The city was lighting up across the river. Somewhere a graduation party was playing music, faint, distant, the soundtrack of someone else's celebration. Mine, Sophia said quietly. It wasn't a question. Yours, Adrian agreed, always. The sun dropped below the rooftops of Cambridge. She didn't move, neither did he. Some endings weren't endings at all. They were just the moment before everything began. 6 months later, Sophia launched her own consulting firm in downtown Boston. 3 employees, 1 conference room, and Chase Industries as her first client. She met Adrian's board of directors, he met Priya, who cried and said she'd been shipping this for years. They spent weekends at the Chase estate, now filled with gardenias she'd planted herself. Vanessa sent a postcard from Paris. I'm in therapy, it's helping, I'm sorry. Sophia kept it next to Adrian's letter in her desk drawer. On the 1-year anniversary of their cafe meeting, Adrian took her back to the rooftop garden. He produced a ring, a sapphire deep blue. I'm not asking you to marry me yet, he said. I'm asking you to promise me you'll stop running. Even when it's hard, even when you're scared, promise me. You'll stay? Sophia looked at the ring, at the man, at the gardenias and the city lights. I promise, she said. He slid the ring onto her finger, it fit perfectly. Of course it did. They stood there, hand in hand, the gardenias releasing their fragrance into the summer air. For the first time in either life, Sophia Reed was not running, she was not hiding, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Some endings, she finally understood, were just the moment before everything began.